Sorry. Yeah, nice of that. Okay. Okay. I'm not gonna use the go. It's kind of weird. Okay, good evening, everyone. I call this meeting to order at 6:18 p.m. Thank you to our interpreter, Jocelyn. Would you please share the interpretation instructions with our participants, and then we can turn on the interpretation function. Thank you. Present tonight, we have Director Tytler, and myself, meaning we have a quorum.
And Director DeFreitas.
Oh, and Director DeFreitas is joining us via Zoom. The first business in order is the approval of the agenda. Directors, are there any proposed changes to the agenda? Do I have a motion to approve the agenda as presented or with amendments?
Proponents on top of the consent agenda is later, correct?
Yeah.
I make a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
Have a second?
I second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Our next agenda item is our opening celebrations and updates by our superintendent, Dr. Anna Cole.
Good evening. The month of January is designated as School Board Recognition Month to honor these individuals who go above and beyond for all of Colorado schools and their students. Our schools all collaborated on some really fun school spirit gifts for you. So we are really excited. It's super random in sizes and swag, but you're going to love it. And so we expect to see you with your school spirit all around town. We just know you're going to enjoy it. So we are so grateful for the leadership and advocacy of Directors Kuhlenberg, Ramirez, Tytler, After, and DeFreitas. The investment of your time, energy, and expertise in supporting the Roaring Fork schools is significant, and we are so grateful. So super happy to celebrate you this month. Also want to celebrate today and thank our partners at Colorado Mountain College. First off, for my very snappy vest that they told me I had to wear at a board meeting. So I'm wearing it at a board meeting. And also thanks to our HVAC crew that make it nice and warm and comfortable in here. So I'm going to take it off. But big thanks to Team CMC for the partnerships we have in so many different areas: concurrent enrollment for our students, teacher education, career and technical education. This afternoon, Director Ramirez was there as we celebrated the grand opening of the Automotive Tech Center in Glenwood Springs at our Ops Center on 27th Street. We currently, in partnership with CMC, have over 48 students from 5 high schools. So all 3 of our Roaring Fork traditional schools, from Bridges, our alternative education campus, from Yampa High School, all coming together from those high schools, are all now engaged, over 48 students, in hands-on workforce development coursework in automotive technology. Students are earning college credits and valuable skills. And this work is the result of a really unique partnership with CMC, where Roaring Fork School District brought facilities to the table, facilities improvements to the table, brought some funding for the courses. CMC is bringing the instructor, the curriculum, some of the technology. If you haven't been to the space, you should go because it is beautiful. We got to be there today. And our students are so psyched to be part of this work. And so a real celebration. So many thanks to Colorado Mountain College. And then finally, want to really appreciate tonight and over the last few months, our leaders at Basalt Middle School, Glenwood Springs Middle School, Carbondale Middle School, and Glenwood Springs Elementary have worked in collaboration with the Family Resource Center to offer parent education nights to help families navigate the changing dynamics related to changes at the federal level. Last night, we had over 100 families attend an education opportunity at Glenwood Springs Elementary School, and we are so grateful for the collaboration between the Family Resource Center, school leaders, and local partners and nonprofits. That truly demonstrates our commitment to ensuring students and families have access to all the support needed to thrive in a dynamic world. So a big thanks to the Family Resource Center and school leaderships for building relationships, building trust with families, and ensuring that our schools are safe and inclusive learning spaces for all. This work is deeply aligned to strategic priority number 4, student-centered partnerships, and is critical to our mission. So tons of thanks for the leadership of the FRC. And that's it for tonight.
Thank you. The next business in order is the superintendent report, including a fund balance presentation from Dr. Cole. Chief Chacoin and Anthony Singh, RBC Capital Markets, Administrator of the Education Load Program and Revenue Anticipation Notes, ETRAN. Each board member will have 2 minutes to share comments or ask questions.
Well, I'll introduce this a little bit and then I'm going to step way back. As we've been working really hard to address some of our fiscal challenges that have shown up in the 23-24 fiscal year, 24-25 fiscal year, and we are working through as we're projecting into 25-26. One of the potential solutions to addressing some of our challenges is using our fund balance. And we've done that before. And fund balance, again, is our reserves. And we have limits of where that fund balance and reserves needs to stick based on board policy and state statute. And we're going to talk more about this, but generally, in our board policy, there's language that says that we can dip below our fund balance limit set by the board as a rainy day fund. And as we have worked to bring proposals and are working tonight, the board is going to really look at a supplemental budget proposal, which is kind of our proposed resolution to the current fiscal year challenges. What you're not going to see in our recommendations is any solution that involves dipping below our minimum fund balance as set by the board policy and as set by state statute. And that's really important. And it is a position that our leadership team is taking, that we do not want to dip below that. And the purpose of tonight's superintendent report is really to explain the why of that and why you are not going to see that as part of our recommended solutions. And it has a lot to do with some of the unintended impacts of having a low fund balance. And so we're really delighted to have Chief Chacoin here to explain that and Anthony Singh here to explain that, and to really help our Board of Education and our community understand why we don't believe that this is a strategy that we should be using to resolve our current issues. So what we're going to do is we'll have Chief Chacoin and Anthony Singh really talk through the slide deck, and then we'll have the time, as we always do, for questions and discussion. I'm actually going to trade you.
Okay.
So that you're a little closer.
Okay, that sound good?
There we go. Okay.
Okay, thank you. I'm just really grateful to have Anthony here tonight and really he can just talk a little bit about his role if he'd like to. I can just kind of summarize it with RBC Capital, right? And what he does is he oversees and reviews all of the state loan program information and all the spreadsheets brought in, and he's the expert on all this stuff. And so we're really excited to have him here because he has a lot of extensive experience around state loan program, around cash flows, around even just looking at fund balances and how rating agencies work even about the financial health of the organization. And so he has, and it's specific to school districts. So we're really excited to have you here. So we're really appreciative. Is there anything else you want to add about your background, or is that about good? Okay.
Yep, sums up.
Perfect. Perfect. Okay. So we'll just jump right in. Oh, did I do oopsie day? Oh, there we go. I gotta go this one. Wrong. This. Okay. Okay. Superintendent Cole had already talked a little bit about what our current fund balance is and funds balance policy is. And to summarize it, it's in the yellow, is that we have a fund balance policy that states that it's 10% of the district's current fiscal year adopted general fund revenues, plus and that's, of course, excluding allocations to the charter school fund, and then adding in the emergency reserve required by the Colorado Constitution, which is Taxpayers' Bill of Rights, which is also dubbed as TABOR. Okay. There's other parts of this fund balance policy, but that's really the heart of what the minimum fund balance policy currently is. Okay. So then we could get into a little bit, what is the district's current minimum fund balance? And so I just followed that exact calculation that is in the board policy. So 96.4 million, 96.5 million in budgeted general fund revenues, plus your early childhood education revenues, because that's now in a separate fund, but it's still really part of the general fund, but we now separate that into two different funds. But technically, because it's Fund 19, so it's still in that 10 to 19 range. It's still considered operational funds. So that's why we added that in. And then plus historically, when the fund balance policy was enacted, that was included in the general fund. So there's two reasons there why that's in there. Subtracting out the charter school allocation, which was specifically excluded, to get to the total revenues for the 10% calculation of 92 million. And so you take 10% of that, which is kind of easy math, 9.2 million. Then you add in the Tabor balance as of June 30, 24, for what balance was at that point in time, which is our best estimate of what it is currently. And that's our minimum fund balance calculation for current, which is through June 30 of 2025 of 12.11 million. Okay. So, I just to note that's a little different than what it was in the budget of 12.55 million, but this is the exact calculation. I think that it was just kind of shortcutted or simplified in the 24-25 budget. Okay. Then what is the district's current fund balance? That's the next question that I would ask if I was a board member, or whoever in the public, where are we at? We know what our target is now, or not, like our targeted minimum, and where is the district sitting? So the general fund balance in the audit was $14,058,000. And that includes the 2.9 million in Tabor plus the unassigned amount of the fund balances. There's a note at the bottom, which is committed and assigned fund balance are for carryovers. Those are for schools, for their allocations, to make sure that those are specifically earmarked and that we're not going to count those for the ability for the district to use for any purposes, because we want to make sure that we're setting those aside properly. And that's why I put that footnote there, so people can understand the difference in our audits between those different types of fund balance, okay, and the reasons for it even. Okay, so you look at, we are expecting to use some fund balance for our self-insurance issue for this year, 900,000. And that's in addition to the 1 million that we used in the prior year. Then we have an expected use of fund balance of 588,000 to help offset some of the things that we've had in issues this year that we'll go through in the supplemental budget later. But that's just kind of the summary of what that looks like currently. So the estimated fund balance that we have right now is roughly 12.56 million, 12.57 million is our estimated fund balances June 30, 25. And that once again is for Tabor restricted and unassigned only. That doesn't include our carryovers. Okay. Just to make sure that, that those are denoted separately. Okay. Looking at cash flow, this is just some of the history of where we've come with cash flow. And this is kind of where Anthony's part of the conversation comes in, is where are we at? How do we get here kind of question. So for 23-24, we had no cash flow needed. We had an available cash flow balance that was reduced by 23.9 million between the end of the fiscal years. Okay. And you can look at the audited financial statements to find that information. And then looking at the fund balance, so that's your cash balance. So I'm trying to show a correlation between cash balance and fund balance. And there's a very specific correlation here. So, and that played true also in FY24, because when you look at the fund balance reduction, that was 21.8 million. And so there's a very strong correlation between the two. There's only not a strong correlation if you have additional debt or something else that has affected it besides just your fund balance change. Okay. But generally, those are going to be very strongly correlated. So then for 24-25, state cash flow increased from $0 to an estimated of 15 million for 24-25. That's how I started talking to Anthony on a regular basis. Is that, wow, that's a big increase between years. Originally, we thought it was going to be 7.5 million. And so there's a couple of causations of why that happened. First of all, is you're looking at the property tax increase between 2022 and 2023. That's when we saw our large increase in assessed valuation. So that actually was only part of the story of why we have to borrow now. So our cash flow really started to deteriorate in that year partially because of that seasonality in 22, 23. But then we also started using that cash for 23, 24, and then into 24, 25. And for items that were planned already that we're going to go into next. Okay. So actually, I'm going to pass this to Anthony first before I go into that and have him talk a little bit about what the generalities are of what they look at with the fund balance and how that affects the fiscal health of the organization.
Absolutely. And thank you guys for having me again tonight. So to kind of summarize the way I first describe it to people, school districts get paid effectively 3 times a year. Outside of state share or equalization, which used to come in every single month, now it's coming in every 9 months. If you're a locally funded school district, which a lot of resort communities are, you get paid in March, May, and June of every single year. So that fund balance that you carry over every single year, you start, paying salaries and benefits in July, and you have to float all the way until March, right? So if your starting fund balance gets lower and lower and lower, what you're trying to do now is you're trying to float effectively 9 months until you get your first real paycheck, right? So like if I were to budget that out for like myself, imagining I get paid 3 times a year, I would want substantial reserves on the side in case anything popped up. And what's been happening over the state or in the state over the last handful of years is taking your total program funding, which is how schools get funded in the state. It goes through its iterations every single year. If you just hold that constant, right, and you take your breakdown of your state share, which is what the state picks up, and then your property tax funding. So if your assessed value goes up, that shifts most of the onus on the districts, right? So then more importantly, those 3 payments, you get larger and larger and larger, your state share goes down. So instead of receiving, a steady paycheck from the state every single month, you can that gets reduced down and down and down. And the district now is receiving about 1/3 of its total program funding in state share and 2/3 from property taxes. So what happens is if that starting balance gets lower, you need to, how it's transpired, is reach out to the state. The state offers an interest-free loan program, which the district participates in. Many other school districts across the state do, but it's becoming a larger program every single year just because of every single district is going through effectively the same thing, right? Expenses stay flat, if not increase, due to salary pressures or what have you, and revenues are generally the same. So what happens is those loans get larger and larger and larger, and if your starting balance gets smaller, don't want to steal Christy's thunder, but your loan goes up pretty precipitously. It goes up very, very quickly. It's not just like a 1-to-1 increase. It's right, like if my starting balance goes down to start the year off in July, my loan goes up $1. It goes up considerably because you have to float a lot longer with just less money. So any questions as far as that's got it.
Thanks, Anthony. So when we were talking with Anthony, I've been talking about like, well, so what does that look like as far as what you would want to see for fiscal health and for cash flow situation in this district's case and in most districts' case, as far as a percent in available cash compared to the total expenses. And really what his benchmark is 20%. That really shows that they have adequate cash to cover, and that they're not dipping so low. We're not dipping so low in our fund balance that we're going to end up at the negative at the end of the year. So there is a kind of a benchmark that they use for that. And just to give you an idea of where we're currently at, it's 22%. The planned reduction in fund balance for 24-25, and estimated right now is that it would bring us down to about 15%. So it's below that. So it starts to get a little bit in the orange zone, with that and the cash flow. And the next point on the slide is really what Anthony was talking about with the use of the state loan program multiplies and not adds to the increasing loan amount because of the compounding effect of lower cash balances month over month. So in December, you think you're going to be at like last year you were at a positive 3 million, and then the next year you're at like 0. Well, then in January, then between years, then it goes down pretty significantly. each year, depending, like, because then it starts to compound itself because you have more months that you have to borrow. So you get into a deeper hole, if you will, is kind of what I'm trying to explain. And so when we're looking at this, there's a very complicated spreadsheet that we don't want, to have to explain publicly because it is very complicated. But basically it's a good spreadsheet and it's put into place for a very good reason to make sure to check these kind of things from cash flow perspective as well as fund balance and fiscal health, that spreadsheet showing that like given what we're anticipating we're going to decrease in our cash flow balance, that it looks like we're going to go from 15 million to an estimated 35 million. And so then that gets us close to one of the top borrowers in the state. Just because we're just getting close on our minimum fund balance. So it just really, that's what Anthony keeps calling me every month about it. Are we sure you're going to go down an additional 13 million for the next year? I'm like, I've checked it 3 or 4 times, and we've confirmed it multiple times, this information. And we've had all these different conversations, but that's kind of our discussion that we've had pretty much twice a month now is and making sure that we're not missing anything, because when it gets into cash flow like this, I mean, that's when you got to make sure that you've got enough cash flow to pay your payroll. So we have to get really tight on that spreadsheet to make sure it's accurate and there isn't any surprise, because it's really hard to determine the timing. So then it becomes a timing issue of when we receive a grant from the state versus when we have to pay our payroll versus when we have a big contract that we're paying for something in our capital projects fund. All of those things start to matter. And that's why this work becomes pretty depthful pretty quickly in making sure that we're still meeting the mark that we still need to meet in a low cash flow environment. Okay. So other considerations with fund balance. So fund balance is the only thing that protects the district from the need of immediate layoffs or cuts in certain situations. And those situations do occur. So like black swan events is something that nobody ever wants to talk about, but definitely those things do happen. The state does have mid-year cuts if there's something that happens like catastrophic. That would be very unfortunate, but those things do happen. Or in the district. Those things can happen is that you have something happen on a capital side or something like that is immediate and it needs to be resolved with finances. Self-insurance issue. So if we wouldn't have had any cash flow balance or cash fund balance, what would we have done to have to shore up that 1.9 million? Budget errors and omissions. Those things, I mean, in a human system, those things do happen. And especially when you have transitions between people or in the situations that we've seen, sometimes it just happens. We try to minimize that as much as possible, but it's going to take a year for me to discover all the errors in the budget and the omissions and some of the challenges that we're facing. State reductions and lower student count. That's something that we really try to capture. We have a demographer and that we're working with that has really tried to capture that and make sure that we've got all of the relevant information. But there's things that happen with that can lower our student count, even below an estimate that we see as conservative, because we don't want to be too conservative, right? Unforeseeable expense emergencies. So those things happen. Impacts of being a high-level cash flow borrower on the organization, staff time, lack of flexibility, potential substantial cut if the state loan program changes. That is something that the legislature can change. And so they can increase our interest rate that they're going to charge us. They can do other things with that. So we just have to be thoughtful on that as we're moving into the state loan program in a big way. Less recurring interest. I did some calculations on that, and it's 115,000 in the supplemental budget for 24-25, but it's going to be closer to plus 600,000, 630,000 is my estimate for 25-26 is what we're going to lose in interest earnings. So, because we had a 25 budget of 997,000, almost $1 million. So that takes 2/3 of that away. Lower bond rating potentially and higher borrowing costs, and less flexibility for district needs. Once the fund balance is spent, it's spent. Anthony, because this is really a place of your expertise, could you speak a little bit more to bond rating and higher borrowing costs and some of the effects there?
Absolutely. So one half of our or my business, I guess, is administering the loan program on behalf of the state. Probably takes up most of my time, but considering there's like 30 to 40 districts, the other half of it is working with districts on general obligation bonds, certificates of participation, different financing needs to help school districts. So obviously with the most recent election, it's been a very, very busy last few months. But what we've been doing, and we actually had one this morning, are rating calls with rating agencies. And while they don't necessarily see that districts participate in the cash flow loan program, because if you think about it, the loan is taken out and repaid within, a certain fiscal year. So there's really no impact on your financial statements. They do see your fund balance. And fund balance, as Christy pointed out, is not exactly the same as cash balance, but for all intents and purposes, they're very, very close. And more frequently, we've seen rating agencies pay very close attention to fund balance because on most districts across the state, outside of, kind of random little occurrences, they are declining for the exact reason that we laid out. Revenues just can't keep up with expenses, no matter how you slice it, whether that's, they issue a COP that they, have no recurring revenue for, or pupil counts going down, or whatever else, or black swan events, as we mentioned, like, roofs coming down or floods or whatever, that has to get paid out of your general fund, right? You don't have bond money set aside for that. So during those conversations, most of it revolves around that fund balance. And if they do see a steady decline year over year in your guys, or not particularly you guys, but in just a fund balance, it is a point of concern. And certainly when you add in all of the other states' obligations between pensions and what have you, it really starts to make these ratios that we see look out of whack. So it is something to be cognizant of if the district has any future financing needs, whether it be a GO bond or a COP or what have you, because it does certainly come into the conversation then. And it's hard to quantify how much exactly it impacts, specific rates that a district would get, but it is certainly higher. A lower bond rating is a higher rate for all intents and purposes, even with the state intercept program, which most districts use. So it is something to be aware of, but not, an immediate need or an immediate concern.
Thank you. Thanks, Anthony. We'll go to the next slide. So this is the staff recommendation from myself and the superintendent, is that we do not alter our district's fund balance policy, and we do not utilize fund balance below the minimum to resolve current budget issues as much as we can. There's going to be things that are going to come up that might hit us out of left field, but really to work hard to try to mitigate those things, as we've been doing through the supplemental budget and other things throughout this whole school year, really, pretty much since I've been here. So that's our recommendation, and that's why, in looking at potential next steps, is taking time to look at the 25-26 budget once approved. Any additional losses uncovered, reasonable fund balance for deferred maintenance for capital items. That's something we really haven't talked about. We are anticipating a zero balance in our capital reserve account. And so we have nothing saved for either black swan events that were discussed, if the, floods or heaven forbid any of those things happen, and or deferred maintenance, which are things that we know are going to happen, but that we have to save up for over time. And a great example is roofs, because roofs are millions of dollars on, for example, a high school, and we don't really have anything saved for that right now. So that's something that we just need to consider as we're moving forward. So, and then looking how we can slowly increase the district's fund balance back over time. I know Shannon Pelland, when she was here, she did have a fairly good fund balance that she had built throughout that time, but it takes a while. And because, it's definitely something that you have to look closely and make sure that it's not coming at the impact to kids or students or staff and how to balance that very carefully. And that's why I would recommend a different and new conversation around this. And then reviewing the existing fund balance policy. And if you would, Anthony had suggested using expenses as a benchmark. He sees a lot. I've done that also, just to look at the benchmark and see what the board and the superintendent obviously feels comfortable with, looking into the future now. And then reducing the financial risk of the organization. Just continuing the conversation. I think that really everybody understanding the impacts of our fund balance is critical to the organization. It's once again an education of the entire organization and understanding it. And then within that education, then we can get to our best solution moving forward. Okay. Are there any questions?
Thank you so much. Directors, we will now have 5 minutes for each board member will now have 2 minutes to share comments or ask questions. We'll begin with Director DeFreitas.
Hi all, can you hear me okay?
Hello.
Is that all right if I talk like this? You can hear me?
Yes.
Great, thanks. Thank you for that presentation. And the memo was very helpful to follow along with and refer to. I really don't have any questions about the content, so thank you.
Director After.
Great. Thanks for coming out and traveling to visit us. We appreciate your expertise here tonight. And thank you also, Christy and Anna. Can you just explain again the Tabor balance part? We need to keep 3% set aside for Tabor. What for? Will we ever have to pay that back to taxpayers, for example, or what's the purpose there?
That is a really great question. Thank you. That was part of what was passed quite a while ago, a couple decades ago with the Taxpayers Bill of Rights, is that they require a 3% minimum fund balance for all school districts. And so that is considered something that is not movable. I mean, so at least we have to have that 3%. And the district has chosen on top of that to have an additional 10%. So that is always going to be there in our fund balance, regardless of any decision moving forward because of that legislation and the Bill of Rights. I think that was passed by the voters. Is that right? Yeah. Mhm.
Okay. Yeah.
And part of the program that we administer on behalf of the state, and it ranges anywhere from like 800 million to over $1 billion annually for all school districts. It's obviously interest-free to schools, but it is not interest-free to the state to issue the debt. In more over the last handful of years since COVID, it's more and more expensive. So it's a very real expense to the state. All that said, what we do is through the spreadsheet that's very complicated, we require districts to spend down all of their available general fund cash before they, reach out to a loan. You can think of it effectively as a bridge loan that a business would use. So that's a short-term financing like that. And right off the top, we take out fund balance or take out the Tabor reserve. So in a very, very dire situation, that Tabor reserve should still always be there and should never be touched. Because for our purposes, once you spend down all of your cash, you still have that Tabor reserve locked away in a bank somewhere, hopefully generating interest. And then you can, go ahead and apply for a loan.
Got it. Thanks. What are the risks of the state loan program not remaining solvent or not being approved in this year or future years?
I don't want to speak on behalf of like the legislature itself, but this program has existed for the last 20 some odd years,
Okay.
in effectively the same manner. We've been very adamant in its administration. We've been working with the state on it since its inception. There's never been a school district that's default because of how closely we watch it. That said, as districts go from borrowing zero to quickly borrowing over a handful of years, and we can kind of see how it'll play out, which is why I'm obviously here tonight to explain it to you guys or help explain it. We do monitor it very closely, and we only allow districts to borrow up to a certain amount. which is 70% generally of whatever you guys are going to collect in your property tax and for the entire year. Reason being is that if you're only going to receive, call it $100 million, we wouldn't allow you to take out a loan more than 70 million, just so the district will have, money on the side in addition to, sometimes we get these spreadsheets back and so we're going to borrow more than we're going to receive. And it's like, well, how are you going to repay that? I don't foresee a situation where the state would stop administering this program. They've actually enacted the shift last year, the change of legislature to shift those equalization of those state share payments from 12 months to 9 months. And for most borrowers, that has had a noticeable impact, not for, the very, very large ones like Denver and Cherry Creek, et cetera. But anybody that's on the cusp, having 9 equal disbursements versus 12 has helped out considerably, especially this year, for reasons we won't necessarily get into, but state share increased dramatically for pretty much every single district across the state, from the month of December going into January, once they started truing up every single value between pupil count and assessed value. So
I just have one more question for you, if that's okay. It seems like you have a lot of experience working with districts across the state, including those with declining enrollment. And so I just wonder if you could share your assessment on how, from your perspective, how dire our situation is compared to others you've worked with.
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's necessarily more dire in terms of pupil count. But what happens with pupil count, and they're trying to adjust for this because again, every single year they're making changes to the school finance formula. We really think about it in terms of your total program funding. So lower pupil count shrinks that pie. How that pie is comprised is largely how kind of we interact with districts as far as like how much you need to borrow. So if that pie is shrinking, it becomes more and more difficult without, somehow cutting expenses or increasing revenues. So those are really the two ways you kind of get out of this situation or any situation across the state. And again, it's not unique. There are a lot of districts that call us and say, hey, we can't make payroll next week. And that's a big problem. We're well in advance of that. Have all of our bases covered. So it's not extremely dire from that situation. But I will say that we do see these, again, occur going from zero borrowing to 15 million to an anticipated, $30 to $40 million next year. That's when we start to, right now, I would say it's a yellow flag. Next year, it would be more of a red flag because you can't continue to do that. You pretty much have a 1 to 2 year runway of spending down fund balance like that. And then after that, then it's really, you need to, there are no really alternatives other than increasing revenues or decreasing expenses. The only way you increase revenues are increase pupil count, pass the mill levy override, and then, decreasing expenses. There are a handful of ways to do that, but we won't need to get into those.
Thanks a lot.
But
Director Tyler.
Anthony, thank you for being here. Appreciate that. My first question is, can you explain the bullet on the cash flow and fund balance that has the 2 big bullets that where it says our estimated cash need to borrow increases from 15 million to 35 million. I thought we were talking that we were going to be borrowing 15 million. Is that 35 million for a future year? And why would it be more in the future year?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Christy laid this out pretty well. So borrowing $0 last year, you guys spent down fund balance. And again, fund balance and cash balance aren't necessarily the same. You don't pay salaries and benefits, and that's what I largely care about. Is we make sure salaries and benefits get paid. That's the most important thing. And that comes from your cash. Your fund balance doesn't always exactly translate to your cash. There's timings of grants. There's a handful of other things, but whatever is in your bank account is how you're going to pay whatever your expenses are for that month. So if you spend that down year over year, your starting cash balance is lower, regardless of whatever happens to your fund balance, because it can be random unassigned stuff. There can be bonds thrown in there, whatever. But your cash balance is lower year over year. So what happens is, again, if that shift from the state share to locally funded, which has been the case generally across since COVID, continues to occur, the district is now more responsible for paying those, or I guess, let me backtrack. Say your expenses stay the exact same year over year, and your source of revenue now is just deferred until March. So instead of having enough fund balance on hand to float a little bit longer, say you can wait all the way until January and take out a loan, which is the situation that we're in now. Now you're having to borrow in November. And by nature of this program, we already require your operating or general fund balance or general operating monies to be zero. If you're already at zero in November, now you have to float December, January, February, and then wait until March. Again, just keeping everything else the same. So you have to now borrow for 4 or 5 months versus just the 1 to 2 months, which is more typical for districts. Generally, the cash flow low point for districts is right before you think you get most of your property taxes, which is January and February. If districts start coming to us in December and then November and then October, the earlier it gets, the longer you have to float and the higher your borrowing gets. I mean, 35 million would put you at like 3 or 4 in the state, which coming from 0 to last year would be a very substantial increase. And that would probably warrant attention from the state as well. It doesn't necessarily come back to the district, but we, similar to those rating conversations, we have rating conversations on behalf of the state for these notes that we sell, how the cash flow loan program gets funded. And they do pay attention to the largest borrowers in the program in any way that's popped up new year over year. Because it'll show you, like, we show them a table. It's like, how much did they borrow last year? How much are they borrowing this year? And what percentage of the program are they? So if you borrow 0 and then you pop up, it's like, wait a minute, like, we'll flag it and we'll need to call it out. It's not more than a 2-minute conversation, but it does get called out by the state, and Treasury is aware of it.
Thank you for that explanation. I'm still not quite understanding the why from 15 million to 35 million. Is it that the expectation that because we're expecting that our property taxes are going to continue to take a bigger amount, or why are we going from 15 to 35?
Yeah. So I guess operationally, like, I think specifically how we came up with that number from 15 to 35. Yeah, I can explain it. You can feel free to add in.
Yeah.
What we did is we took the anticipated spend down this year in your guys' cash balance and just plug that back into the start of the spreadsheet. So saying your revenues and expenses are the exact same as they are this year. If you just start with a different cash balance, your borrowing amount then goes from 15 million to 35 million, keeping everything else consistent. Obviously, that's not the case because there's going to be budgetary adjustments and what have you. But if you did the exact same thing as this year as you did, or I guess the exact same thing in fiscal year 25-26 as you did in 24-25, that's how we came up with the 35 million.
And it wasn't needed 35 million this year because of?
Because we're looking at reducing our cash flow balance by 13 million. For this year.
Okay.
And most of that, is the restricted and unrestricted amount. So that is a lot of the Meadowood. The finish of that completion of that project was like, roughly 10 million. And then spending that fund balance down to 0 on our capital projects fund. All those are pretty impactful on our cash flow balance, as well as some of the items that we're showing, that $3 million deficit that you'll see in the supplemental budget. So that generally is how we got to the $13 million number. And that was what we were having to confirm back and forth, as you were saying, are you sure you're going to spend another 13 million in fund balance or in cash flow? And I was like, let me check on that. And so then I just kept diving into the spreadsheet for hours just to make sure that all of the numbers were scrubbed accurately, and really discovered it was around that capital projects issue. And then some of the other things we were seeing on our general fund balance that we are going to discuss further on our supplemental budget.
Okay, thank you. When you talk about a lower bond rating or higher borrowing costs, is that for future borrowing or current borrowing? Like if we have a COP right now, is that going to affect the COP that we currently have?
So COPs are a little bit interesting because we don't, in the state of Colorado, bond monies is from like a general obligation, that you pass in November are effectively walled off. You can't touch that money. You can't pay salaries and benefits for it. We get that question all the time. That's its own thing, completely separate. COPs, however, are funded from your general fund. So for all intents and purposes, whether it's in one account or another, that money is fungible, meaning, you can transfer it back and forth between to pay a COP, to pay salaries and benefits, or whatever else you need to pay for out of the general fund. And mostly, I would say it's for anticipated future borrowing. So not what's outstanding. However, rating agencies do annual or periodic credit reviews where they do look at your guys' audit year over year, and we'll see, you know, a spend down in a fund balance. Whether that warrants a downgrade, not exactly sure, but it's unlikely, highly unlikely. But that being said, it is something that will probably pop up, and I would assume you guys probably get, you know, messages from Moody's or S&P or whoever rated your guys' last COP issuance with that exact thing. So they do annual credit checks for the exact same reason. So that they will see that, but you know, those bonds are already issued. Even if they do get downgraded, you already have a fixed rate that you're paying for them.
So the rate wouldn't change.
The rating could potentially change.
The rate wouldn't change.
Rate won't change, no.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question I have is just at the very end of these slides, where the last bullet, it says, reduce the financial risk to the organization, and I'm sorry, right above that, review existing fund balance policy, use expenses as a benchmark. Can you explain what it means to use expenses as a benchmark and how that has to do with the fund balance policy?
Yeah, so it's just a little bit interesting when Christy first showed me the district's fund balance, and good on you guys for having one that's in, you know, in writing. A lot of districts don't even have that. But if you think about it in terms of, okay, just say your total expenses are $100 million and your total revenues are $50 million. If your fund balance policy is based off of those revenues and you just use the 10%, you only need $5 million in reserves. However, if your expenses are so much higher, really, like, that's the more important part. So
got it. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Well, thank you again on behalf of the board for being with us here today. I had a couple comments. I think, obviously we're not voting on this tonight. This is just for our information and for the public's information. I do think that, just in conversations we've been having as a team, I feel like as a board member, I have voiced that I believe we should increase our fund balance number in our policy. I think that us taking out the loan this year, and through conversations we had with Paul, that there were significant concerns from those of us that spoke with him about the possibility that should the state loan program close, as it did in, I think, the last recession in 2008, that we would sort of be left with this debt. And so, you know, first and foremost, I wanted to make sure that I stress that I hope that our board and our district is eventually at a place where we can increase that number and that expectation of what our fund balance looks like. I also had a suggestion, and I'm not sure if this is something that we would ask of our CFO, but I do wonder, Christy, if your recommendation couldn't be made to the board for a formal vote for a set time of how long you want us to keep this fund balance. Because right now, you know, it's obviously a discussion, and you guys left it open to basically just saying this year and next year. But just thinking of the district and the forward-facing goals that we have, and also the debt that we have as of today, like, I do wonder, should this be something that we codify? And that we say, like, we are committed for the next 5 years to maintain this fund balance, because as we all know, we have transitions in our team and things could change.
Thank you for that, Director Ramirez. I think that the best timeline to do that, in my best assumption right now, or looking forward into things, is to get through this fiscal budget year for 25-26. Then first of all, I'm fully trained on all of our, you know, the programs we use and things like that, and understand depthfully all of the intricacies of the budget, so that we can include all of those kind of things in that conversation. So my best estimate would be somewhere in the first quarter or the second quarter of next fiscal year would be a really great time to have that discussion before the next budget cycle.
before the 26-27 budget cycle.
Correct.
Okay. I mean, I don't disagree. I understand the time restraints that we have and capacity as well. Again, I just want to make sure I state that recommendation to the team because I do think that just thinking of the moment that we're in, you know, having a safety net for us, I think would be really important. I did have just one question on the state loan. What is, you know, I know that we approved it and I know that we had this conversation at our last board meeting, but what is the timeline for our repayment?
Actually in the resolution, and it doesn't always happen exactly this way. But those funds, when you do receive your first substantial property tax payment in March, technically, probably the resolution, they're due the following business day. It doesn't always happen that way, right? Things are closed, it's a weekend, whatever. So assuming it's sometime within the next week. Because if you think about it from the state's perspective, the longer the money is lent out to districts, the more it costs them, right? If it just sits in their account and they collect interest on it, it's not a big deal. But we do need to spend that money. So by all intents and purposes, like the money is there to spend for people. But it should be within one business day. And then should the property taxes not be sufficient to cover the amount of the loan, it's all broken out in the spreadsheet. You would just go to repay whatever amount you're able to, and then you just pay it back with the May payment. So March, May, and June are the big property tax months. If you can't repay it all in March, you repay it in May. If you can't repay it in May, you pay it in June. But if we get to June, then we're probably, you know, a little bit more involved in it. Last year, all their loans were repaid by May.
And what are there fees associated with this if it's not?
If there's no repayment?
Well, if I'm assuming that the team is supposed to reach out to you to let you know the amount they can pay.
Yeah, so we, on an ongoing basis, which is a lot of Christie's time and my time with this, we monitor your monthly revenues and expenditures and then have it forecasted out based on like the last handful of years of collection. So we have a general idea of how much you're going to get in March. If those numbers are substantially different, right, like a major taxpayer or something like is beating their taxes or whatever, which happens somewhat frequently, and like think like oil and gas districts, for example. Then it does start to get delayed, but we do monitor it extremely closely. So if it comes down to, you know, us talking to the county treasurer to see how much fund or how much money was deposited, and I think that is public information, we do go to that extent sometimes to track down this money. Sometimes for various reasons, the county treasurer doesn't send payment. We've had that happen before as well. For example, like an audit not being filed or something else. You know, then the state gets involved to try to figure out the like where the funds are. But as far as fees, there aren't any fees. And then, like I said, in the history of this program, through the great financial crisis, through the .com bubble of 2001, every single loan has been repaid in a timely manner from every single district that's participated.
Okay. Thank you again for being here with us today.
Welcome.
Okay, we are now gonna have 5 minutes for open discussion. If board members have anything else to add.
I don't.
Lindsay, I'm assuming she doesn't. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
No one, Jonathan? Okay. Nobody? Okay. Okay, at this time, we welcome members of the public who have signed up to address the board. There are 0 speakers signed up tonight. The board allots 45 minutes for public comment. To respect the time of all who are present, speakers are to limit their remarks to 3 minutes or less. Members of the public who wish to share their views with the board may always do so in writing at any time. For this evening's public comment, we received 0 written comments. Okay. The next business in order is the approval of the consent agenda, which includes routine personnel minutes from our previous board meeting and policies, JLCD, GBIA, LBD, and regulations JKBA-R and LBD-R. Directors, are there any items that you would like to pull off the consent agenda for a separate discussion and vote?
I would like to please pull off LBD and LBDR, please.
Do I have a second?
I can second it.
You want to second it?
Sure.
Call for a vote, please.
Director Lafter.
Aye.
Director DeFreitas, are you there?
Yes. Aye.
Aye, okay, thank you. Director Ramirez?
Aye.
And Director Tyler?
Aye.
Okay. We will now we'll have 2 minutes for each board member to discuss LBD and LBD-R. Okay, Director Tyler, would you like to start?
Yes, please. In LBD, in the first paragraph, it says that the Board of Education believes that the district and charter school enrollment should represent the communities they serve, and that students should have equitable access to resources and services. And I know it is something that we had discussion with charter schools when we had their contracts about representing the demographics of our community and our district. And being that as a district, we are 58% Latino in our districts. And at CCS, currently it's only 30% Latino. And at Two Rivers, it's only 35% Latino. And I feel like that is something that we need to have as a continued conversation. And I know there's some feedback you can give Dr. Cole about state statute and what is allowed or not allowed in contracts. But I feel like we need to continue to bring up this issue that we have 2 charter schools in our district, and those 2 charter schools do not match our district's demographics.
Yeah, it's been a real priority of this board that the charter schools that we authorize are serving a student population that reflects the student population that we have as a district. And that was a really important piece of the contract process as Two Rivers became a charter school, as CCS was reauthorized 3 years ago. And to be honest, in our work, and not honest, but it's just who they are as schools. Carbondale Community School and Two Rivers Community School also share that desire. Their leadership, their boards are really focused and really truly believe that their schools and their programs and their models are going to best serve the diversity of students at the Roaring Fork schools pools and serves. And so I don't think that there's misalignment in the priority and in the commitment to trying to do that work. I think the sticky piece comes in actually to how far do they go and how far can they go in terms of getting the demographics to match. Both CCS and TRCS have lotteries for application that weight students of color, students from families experiencing, or students from families with incomes below the federal poverty level, and emerging bilingual students are weighted much higher in their lotteries. And to really ensure that when students in those special populations apply, they get admitted. And so part of the challenge then would say, well, then it must be the applications that we're not getting a diverse enough set of applications. And I think that's been a hard piece for the schools. I don't think that there's misalignment in the goals and priorities with the charters. I think the devil's kind of in the details of how this works out. And as we got into this work and we're working on, updating the policy because of some state statute timelines that we needed to review, this issue came up again and raised a lot of great questions for the board, for admin, a couple of things we learned is that if we're gonna, any sort of real expectations or requirements, the strength for us is really in our contract, not necessarily our policy. These policies really lay out the process of how applications should happen, how new schools that want to get started would come to us. And so I do think in the recommendation, and again, as we've dug in with legal counsel on this, they have advised us that if we're going to really have strength in that expectation, the place for that is the contract. As the board's aware, our charter contracts are up for renewal in the 26-27 school year. So we'll actually start that process next year. And I think that what we'll hear in conversations with our charter leaders, which we've been hearing at our school visits this year, is that they share that priority. And I think they're struggling to develop an application pool that reflects the diversity of the community that would then result in an incoming class that better reflects the diversity of the community. So I think that's a sticky piece that we need to work on. The further recommendation from legal counsel also stated that there's limits to what we can legally require and set up some sort of penalty, or like we're limited in the extent to which we can require this. What we can require in our recommendations from legal was that we can expect that we can, I'm going to read some language from our lawyer so I don't get it wrong, that we can safely consider whether any of the charter schools' practices have the effect of excluding students based on socioeconomic, family, or language background. And so that where we could really lean in is making sure that our charters say, and here's recommended language, the charter schools do not establish undue barriers to students applying for enrollment, such as mandated testing, that would have the effect of excluding students based on socioeconomic, family, or language background, prior academic performance, special education status, or parental involvement. So the recommendation is that we talk about reducing barriers, not necessarily holding to the demographic mix. I'll pause there for questions.
I guess my follow-up question to that would be, when speaking to the school leaders at the charter schools, what kind of response have they given to you about things that they are trying, and understanding that, yes, that they want this to match? What kind of things are happening to get us in that place?
Yeah, the weighted lottery is a key lever because it ensures in a lot of ways that students of color, students from low socioeconomic families, low socioeconomic status are going to have a direct shot into placement. That's a big piece that our charters don't necessarily have to have a weighted lottery, but they do. And so I think that's a commitment. I think, I don't know offhand, but we can certainly reach out to them in terms of the outreach, communication, recruitment, what's happening in that realm, because I don't know the specifics about that, but we could certainly ask what they're doing, again, to try to get an application pool that's more diverse so that their placements become more diverse.
That would be great if you could come back to us with that information, because it's great that the lotteries are weighted, but if they're not getting the people applying to help with the weighted lotteries, then it's not going to pan out.
Yep.
So I would like to hear back on how often, how regularly, what kind of things are being done to do that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Director After.
Yeah, thanks. I wasn't sure which policies you wanted to bring up for discussion, so I didn't look at these ones again since last time or 2 weeks ago, but I agree with the sentiment from Director Tyler on the desire to have these publicly funded schools represent the makeup of the constituency whole cloth, and it's disappointing that they don't. I also understand that these are policies required that have to be completed and approved by the end of next month, I think, by the end of February. So I understand what you're saying, that the teeth of trying to hold the charter schools to a standard that isn't currently in a contract or in a written expectation that they've agreed to. It seems like that we're like a year ahead of that process now. And And so we should be ready for that discussion when it comes up. But the legal counsel or the legal advice you just read is interesting in that context too, and maybe a bit of a wrinkle. And just a reminder that the two charter schools in our district have separate boards. And so I don't even know what we're allowed to do, given that they don't even really report to us in the same way. So good food for thought, but I am wondering if we're going to approve this policy tonight.
Well, it's on the agenda to be voted on.
Okay, so after we discuss it, we'll do it. Okay. Or vote on it, sorry.
Director DeFreitas?
Yeah, thanks. I think I shared my comments when this policy was discussed last week, and from my understanding, it seems like the appropriate time to address this with the charter schools and their boards is during the contract process. I'm a little hesitant to ask for further reporting from staff right now. I think that the timeline of that information is better connected to the discussion of the contracts, knowing that we'll need a lot of lead time, and we definitely don't want to leave it to the last minute. But I would be comfortable waiting until staff feels like it's the appropriate time to do that work and guide the conversation along.
Can I comment? I appreciate that, Director DeFreitas. I'll be honest, the lift for me, knowing the priority that the school leaders at CCS and TRCS have around this topic, the lift for me is just asking them to give us a quick update on what their outreach efforts look like for this year, and especially as we head into like kindergarten enrollment. And I know because they do care about this, they would probably frankly welcome the chance to share with this board what they're up to and what they're working on. So I don't think it's too big of a lift, and really it's just me. I'll reach out for a question. They'll send me an email update. I'll pass it on to the board.
Thanks. That's helpful.
Yeah.
I'll just share, obviously this is something that has been brought up many times. We've had many conversations around the contract, the charter renewal, the charter contract, what was omitted, was the conversations we had. I think, I agree that I do think that we need to, as proactively as possible, start having conversations on what we're hoping for the charter renewal process to look like, and the conversations that I think need to be taking place with the boards and with the leadership of our district charter schools. And I also think that I understand, Director Tytler, your concerns on the policies, but, I do think that I agree that these policies are more for the process of having district charters. And then we have the contract in itself, which I do think should carry that commitment from all of us as parties involved to say, this is what we want to collectively work towards in our partnership.
Mm-hmm.
And so I do think again that it's important for us as a board to restate that this is important to us, that we want to work on this, and that we want to bring all of the partners involved forward sooner rather than later. And I think I just want to stress that I know it's the contract year is 26-27. The vote on that should happen with the board that exists, not be pushed over to the next board.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure on how the timing works. In my head, it was always okay, we have to, 26-27 is the year it's up. So I want to make sure that we start it next year and do the works of revision and revising and language and, all the kind of contract renegotiations. Cause I'll double check on that timing of when that happens.
So
Because that's an election year.
So I think we need to be very
Yeah. That's a really good point
to start
push the vote.
looking at that timeline,
Totally got it.
because
Yes.
that conversation needs to take place prior to a new board coming in.
Yes, let's make sure that we have that timelined out for the early, to finish the work by the early fall of 26-27 school year. So
Okay.
that's what I'm hearing, right?
Yes.
Okay, got it.
We ready for a vote?
I would just like that, we have that follow-up 5 minutes, right?
Yes.
I would like to also ask if we can get some kind of demographics of, has there been change over these last 3 years since we had the contracts put in place? Because to my understanding, there hasn't been a change in the percentage of demographics, or maybe there have, but my understanding is if it has, it's been minimal.
We should all be able to pull that data right off of SchoolView on CDE's website. So maybe we should be able to look at that demographic history for the schools.
And I just would like to make like a little bit of an analogy. As teachers, when we're trained in teachers, they say it's not enough that you taught it. It has to, like, you can't say, oh, I taught that, but they didn't get it. Well, if that's the case as a teacher, you're supposed to say, well, you need to teach it in a different way then. And so I don't feel like saying we're trying to get our demographics up is enough. Because yes, I understand you're trying, but if it's not happening, something different has to happen in that sense. And so I believe there needs to be, if it's not working and they're unable to raise those demographics, then they need to try something else that they haven't done yet.
Call for a vote, please.
I think do we have a motion to approve?
Oh, yes, I guess we should make a motion. Can I get a motion to approve policies? Let me go back to which ones we pulled.
Policy, LBD, and
LBD
regulation.
And LBD-R.
Regulation.
I make a motion to vote on LBD and LBDR.
Have a second?
Second.
Call for a vote.
Director After.
Aye.
Director DeFrodies.
Aye.
Director Ramirez.
Aye.
Director Tytler. Aye.
Pass. Thank you. Okay, the next business in order is first read and discussion on policies JB, JF, and regulation ILBC-R, and a second read of regulation JK-R. Each board member will have 2 minutes to share comments or ask questions. We will begin with Director DeFrodies.
Sorry, can you come back to me? I'm having trouble with background noise.
Sure. Director After.
Sure, thanks. I don't have any questions about JB. On JF, this is the one on admission and denial of admission. I added a few questions. I'll just voice over them here. I'm trying to understand when the board would ever make the decision to deny a student admission. Where it says denial of admission under the second heading, the Board of Education or the superintendent may deny admission to the schools of the district in accordance with applicable law. Is that meant as like a macro statement?
It's meant, the board, it's a board policy, but actually in practice, what happens is if there is a denial of admission, it is typically treated in the same process as you might have an expulsion, meaning there's a hearing, there's a whole process and everything, and then they have the opportunity to appeal, in which case it would come to the board. But that timeline is the same.
Okay. The way I interpreted it was that we would deny admission to like a new student. Okay, and then my other question on this one is, I put a comment in, but why are only, so where it refers to McKinney-Vento, that's the students experiencing homelessness. The way this reads is that, to me, was that students experiencing homelessness would be able to enroll immediately. Why would we not allow anyone to enroll immediately if they so choose?
Sometimes we would require birth certificates, proof of address, immunization records for children prior to admission. And we have, I think, some board policies and practices around that those things need to be in place. And for students experiencing homelessness, they don't have to produce those things. We just get them enrolled right away. And so there is not that kind of, there's just not that kind of delay for those sorts of pieces, like the immunization expectations are waived. for
It's a good
kids.
faith effort to contact the parent district.
Yes.
Sorry, Stacey, I couldn't hear you.
There's a good faith effort for something like immunization and it's in ILBC, I think. It's not that one actually, but it's the one on immunizations. But for a student experiencing homelessness, they could enroll right away and wouldn't be prevented from enrolling because they had not yet produced immunization paperwork, for example. We'd still make an attempt to get it from the previous district in which they attended.
But we would deny admission to to a student who is, you know, comfortably housed.
They don't need to produce that. And so when they produce that, then they can start. And typically it's within a couple days.
And we do, I mean, we have strengthened practices and about requiring proof of address for students to enter school. And so, you know, that could be a piece, especially if a student is applying for admission out of district in a school that's at capacity, that we might say, hey, you know what, we really need to see the proof of address that you've moved into the district, because the third grade at this school that you're looking for is actually closed to out of district or opt-in students right now. And so we would delay in those cases and sometimes even deny admission if we're at a capacity max for, say, students out of district. But for students experiencing homelessness, again, there's no delay, no expectation of a proof of address in those cases.
Is Bridges an exception to this policy?
This policy or this, what do you mean?
My understanding was that students can matriculate into Bridges on more of an ongoing basis as they choose. Is that not right?
Within the district, there's for Bridges and they're on the Hexter. So every 6 weeks, they have the rolling admission at the 6-week mark. Are you talking about out of district admission?
No, I'm talking about students who would be in district. They can just, no, I'm talking about students who would be in district and maybe go to Bridges, unenroll, re-enroll.
Yes, they can unenroll and re-enroll. I don't even understand your question. If you can repeat it.
Okay, I'll move on because
The policy does apply to Bridges. This would be for all the schools in the district.
okay. But then I guess I was confused because Anna, you were saying that a student we require proof of address for a specific grade or class.
It would be, so a student who lives within the attendance zone of the school is guaranteed a spot in that school at any time of year.
Okay.
And so so if it's, past the registration date or after October count or whatnot, and a student, let's say, comes in December or January or whatnot and said, we live in the area, I live in the attendance zone, they are asked to produce proof that they indeed live in the attendance zone. In those cases, whether a grade level is at capacity doesn't matter because they are guaranteed a spot. But let's imagine there's yes. And so we ask for proof of that because if the student actually is not living within the attendance zone, which includes living out of district, then there is not a requirement for the school to take the student at that time when they can deny admission.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I was being confusing. I blew all my time on this policy and do have questions about the READ Act. I have 2 extra minutes. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm just pulling it up. Regarding ILBCR, it looks like this is the regulation, but we have the policy, I'm assuming we have the legal policy in place. And what we were lacking, according to the staff memo, was this regulation. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Can you just clarify who's the responsible teacher or staff person for identifying when a student should be on a READ plan? And I'm partly wondering out of personal experience because of my own children's, I didn't know this really was a thing until I read it this weekend. And I was thinking, why wasn't my kid on a READ plan? I feel like something was missed maybe. And so I'm wondering where that notification is or the decision to put someone on a READ plan is. And it's not made explicit in this policy.
So students who are designated as having a significant reading deficiency based on our read, act, approve assessments, which are the DIBELS in English and then Lectura in Spanish. Are those identified as those required to have a read plan? And so all the students who fall below making a sufficient growth or reading at grade level would be identified as needing a read plan. That communication, the teachers create the read plans and the school is responsible for communicating to the parents of the students who have been identified as needing a read plan, that they are in fact on a read plan. Typically it happens in the conferences, in the fall conference that occurs. There's also the March conference. That timing, because October and March are before and after the mid-year, middle of year assessment window, that communication often happens before then.
Okay. And does it usually happen, in your experience, is it usually happening in kindergarten? It says kindergarten first, second, or third. In my discussions with kindergarten teachers, it seemed like there was a general sense that kindergarten's a little too early to do this. We wait and see how things go in first and second grade.
The kindergarten beginning of year assessment is typically TS Gold, which is the sort of the kindergarten readiness that is also done in ECE. The mid-year, or sorry, end of year, I think is when they have the DIBELS and Lectura assessment. The kindergarten first and second grade, the read act is identify that all kids should be reading at grade level by third grade. However, we do have kids who are older than third grade who are on read plans because they have not yet been identified as a reader on grade level.
Do you know how many kids in the district are on read plans?
I have a tracker. I can pull that up, but I can try to pull that up.
Yeah, is it like hundreds, dozens? If you don't
More
know,
than dozens.
more than dozens.
Mhm.
Okay, that's all for now. Thanks. Director Tyler.
I also have questions about ILBC, the early literacy and reading comprehension. And specifically, my questions have to do with how our emergent bilingual students are identified. And I'm hearing right now being said that like we use Lectora or IDEL, but there are many of our schools who don't teach in Spanish particularly. And so how are those students being identified when they're not being taught in Spanish? Are they just being tested in Spanish and expecting that will tell us if they're needing a read plan? And if so, what is being done for those students?
It's a good question. So all of the students are tested in their L1, their first language, and then their second language. If they are, and in some cases, all the students are tested in English. And then if English is not their first language, they are tested in Spanish or the Spanish literacy. I think the first part of your question, part of the deliberation process is intended to identify whether a delay in reading is due to a language difference or a learning difference. And so coupled with, I think, some of the questions in kindergarten, how early is too early to identify that there's a significant reading deficiency present. Those factors are taken into account when identifying whether a student has a significant reading deficiency or not. In terms of the instruction for Spanish or within Spanish for literacy, you're right. I mean, our dual language and our biliteracy schools do have intentional Spanish language development. The schools that don't do have English language development for the students. That's part of actually the consideration when we're thinking about whether a student is demonstrating a significant reading deficiency in their primary language. And to identify how to get them the supports. It's intended to be written also into the read plan in terms of the supports that the student would need.
I appreciate that. However, in this policy, there is only one line in the entire policy that talks about a second language learner. And the only line that talks about it is in the student promotion or retention, saying if the student is identified as an English language learner and the student's significant reading deficiency is due primarily to the student's language skill, then a written notification to parents will not be required. And that is the only thing in the entire policy that talks about a student's second language skills. And so this whole policy is about reading comprehension. There is no mention within the policy at all about students' reading comprehension or their language skills, and which any of that is the cause of this need for a read plan?
I appreciate that feedback. I think we can make that explicit in here.
And I guess I also just question a little bit, what is the, like, I understand the idea behind the read plan, and it is to say if we're having struggling readers, then we need to do something specific for those readers. And so my question is, how are we holding up the end of the read plan for these second language learners who are struggling in their reading? What are we doing in read plan parlance for these learners?
So I think it depends on the school. We had started using a literacy intervention for Spanish as well this year. I think started actually exploring them last year as one measure to support students who are not fluent in reading in their primary language.
And is that being done at all schools?
No, it's not being done at all schools. But it is something where we do recognize that there is a need.
So what are we doing at the schools where it's not being done and there's a need?
I mean, it depends on the grade level. I think for older students, there's Spanish language development, and especially it's when we have our students who are a little older who are struggling to read in Spanish. Spanish language development is an intentional way that there's an intervention provided. Literacy-based units also to support that language development. The intervention that we were looking at in Spanish was for the phonemic awareness and phonics and decoding in Spanish to support. It is an area where we have identified some intentional continued attention on having really strong resources to support students as necessary.
And again, I guess I would just ask the question, are we doing that at all schools?
For
You're saying like Spanish language development, you're saying that was one of the things. Is that being done at all schools?
Yes, as part of supporting in our CLDE programming.
And when is that being done? Like, for example, if a child is being pulled out for English language, ELD, English language development, for a period of their day, if they're a multilingual learner, emergent bilingual, when is this like native Spanish development given to that child?
It's a different period of the day. So, but they're not, what I'm thinking about is in our high schools, for example, there's an intentional SLD class, ELD class, ELSLA. So it's built in as part of the schedule.
And what about at the elementary school?
The elementary school, in some cases, it's during the intervention time where students they're getting a math intervention, literacy intervention. I need to pull up the school's individual schedules to see exactly when all the interventions happen. That is we recognize is we don't want students missing core content to attend an intervention.
I'll pass until our 5-minute time. Thank you.
Okay. Director DeFreitas?
I appreciate the comments of my fellow board members and the thoroughness that the policy committees obviously put into these. Director After specifically asked some of my questions, so I don't actually have a lot to add to these. It was interesting to hear the discussion around the READ plans. Yeah, so thanks. That's all I have.
Okay, so I will just, I did have a question. JK-R, is that not the policy we said that you guys were gonna go through and clean up during policy committee? That's
JKR?
JK-R, the regulation. It's
That was
on the agenda for second read.
I mean, I don't remember exactly where we were and whether this was coming back to policy committee. There's been significant work on this.
So I would just ask that we bring this back to policy committee. I remember having a conversation that this wasn't in the cleanest version that we wanted to go through. And so we.
Was that JIH, student
No,
interviews? And
JIH, we pulled because Catherine wasn't there.
Do you, I mean, I'm scanning our comments and
Yeah.
I'm not clear on what is still unresolved.
I think that there was a conversation, but I couldn't remember if it was this policy that this wasn't ready to be read yet.
We
Like,
definitely-
You guys were not ready for us to review it.
I
No?
don't remember that.
We definitely
Okay.
feel that way about JIH. I think with this one, we feel like the majority, at least in the current iteration, that most of the questions had been resolved, but happy to tackle or bring it back to policy committee if there's something we still need to work on.
Okay, well, let's just bring it back to policy committee just in case. I don't know why I flagged it in my brain right now. I was like, oh, it's on the agenda. And then the only thing I'll add on JB, I did add a line regarding accountability that a board update will be given after new board members are onboarded. I thought it made sense. And I just wanted to make sure I shared that with the board. And I think that was it on the additions from policy committee. Does that sound right? I think we went through these pretty quickly. Right?
Mhm.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll open it up to 5 minutes for board discussion. Dr. Tyler.
I still have a couple questions when we're talking about the READ Act, and it says that under state law, the student, this is in the communication with students, parent, guardian. It says number 6, under state law, the student qualifies for and the district is required to provide targeted, scientifically based or evidence-based interventions to remediate the student's specific diagnosed reading skills or deficiencies. And if we're talking about when we look at emergent bilingual learner and we're trying to identify if it is a reading deficiency or if it is a language deficiency, I am still curious to know how are we meeting then and targeting the diagnosed reading skill deficiencies of a Spanish speaking, non-English speaking student at all of our different schools, and how is that being targeted as the READ plan is designated to do? And so I would like it, if possible, if you could come back with some kind of update for us on how at the different schools this is being addressed, specifically to reading intervention and not a language issue for our emergent bilingual learners.
So you're specifically literacy development in Spanish or our
That's what I'm understanding that this is asking for, because if it's saying that this is supposed to be a reading, the READ plan is supposed to be based upon reading. And if we're saying we're trying to decide if it's a language issue or if it's a reading issue, and if it's a language issue, and then they're still not having the reading that, and they're not on target in their Spanish literacy, and it's a language issue for them to do it in English, then how are we targeting their reading deficiency through the READ Act?
I think I understand your question. I would say if we determine that the delay or student outcomes as measured through DIBELS and Lectura are below what we would expect. And we suspect that it has to do with a student's fluency in English, and they're in a program that is like, we would still be, I'm looking at the components of the READ plan that state that, what we would be the deliberation process is separate from the read plan, right? So that's a different component that happens prior to the development of a read plan. So if we recognize that it's a language deficiency, then we want to give that, we notify parents and we want to give them student time to develop language skills in English, which we believe will happen through the continuation of their education in their program. And so if we get to the point where we feel like, okay, they have sufficient language skills, they should be reading on track. Then, the components, and I'm just trying to get, are you looking for examples of number 3? Like you want the specific operational strategies? Because number 3, the component is what's the instructional programming and interventions a student will receive in reading? What are the educational services and a daily literacy? Is that, I guess I'm just trying to.
Right, and I guess my understanding of this READ Act is like for students who are reading below grade level, they should be receiving literacy instruction intervention. So if a student is still learning English and don't have the capacity per se maybe to be reading on grade level in English, are we going to be trying to still follow through with this READ Act of giving them the literacy instruction that they need to be on level in their reading in Spanish?
I mean, the first thing would be, they would have intervention for English as well.
But that's still not the READ Act, the READ Act is about them being able to read, right? And being able to have that reading ability.
Yes, the READ Act is about their ability to read. The READ Act approved assessments are typically in English. We do give the one in Spanish because we have a number of students whose L1 is Spanish, and it is important, I think, to see are they literate in their primary language? I think that's one of the most important things that we're trying to figure out. And so no one would disagree that providing reading intervention so that student can develop strong literacy skills in their primary language is important.
Correct. But are we doing that then? Or we're not doing that because we don't have the capacity, or we don't have the instructors, or we don't have the time, or why wouldn't we then be making sure that we are doing that?
We are. I think what you're asking for is a summary. What exactly is the programming that is at every school in terms of the interventions? We have lots of literacy interventions that are happening. And we recognize that, if we're in a space where the majority of a grade or a large percentage of the grade is not reading at grade level, what we want to look at is what's the quality of our core instruction for literacy. This is something for sure that I can share in terms of the different things schools are doing. We have many educators who are trained in literacy interventions who are pulling the students. There are a variety of them because some are intended to address phonics, some are intended to address comprehension, some are intended to address fluency, some are intended. So that's what I mean. We have a range of them. Wilson, Sips. Sorry, I'm blanking on the name of the Spanish one, but
I think correct me if I'm wrong.
Mhm.
It's fair to say that every school is driving their read plans and measurements around ensuring that a student is reading on grade level in English. 100% happening at all of our schools. Interventions are happening. And when we develop read plans around a student's strengths and gaps, we are absolutely taking into account whether they are an emerging bilingual brain and how we can use that when we're identifying strategies. Stacey, am I correct to say that the clarity that we're looked at, I think you're asking for, Director Tytler, is do we have the same consistent level of commitment to say we are meeting all the expectations of the READ plan for students whose L1 is Spanish in Spanish? Are we following the READ plan to make sure that at 3rd grade, any child with an L1 of Spanish is reading on grade level? Like, is that what you're at? Are we as consistent?
That, and I think that's pretty much what I'm asking, but where it's a little different, what I'm asking is the idea behind the READ plan is to have children reading on level at 3rd grade.
And I would say
And
in English.
Right. And if they're unable because of their language needs to be able to do that in English, are we as a district saying we're going to use their capabilities and their strengths, which is their advanced literacy skills in Spanish compared to their English, and using that as a positive to increase their reading skills, which we know then transfer over to English.
I would say, and check me, Dr. Park, when our teachers are reflecting on student outcomes, if we, let's say, see a second grader who's new to us and comes in and we're testing them using Lectura because we need a Spanish literacy test. The student's
Correct.
fluent in Spanish, and we find out that their literacy skills are absolutely on point for second grade.
Right.
But they are drastically behind the Dibbles because their language skills in English are not there. Then our determination would say, yes, like they're not hitting the benchmarks of a read plan because of a lack of English at this stage. And so parents would get a notification, and then the interventions that a teacher would be developing for this student in particular would say they already have an understanding of phonics. They already have an understanding of
Correct.
fluency. So our strategies are going to be, how do we help that student apply the skills and strategies that they're already using to decode and read in Spanish over to English? Whereas it's very different for a child who comes in without the phonics. You know, if we're talking about a student who comes in, same student, but doesn't have that literacy, they're not reading at a second grade level in Spanish. Our interventions then are going to be about phonics. It's not.
I agree. That's a very
reading
different thing.
skills. Yeah.
I think my concern is more of children who are coming in at kindergarten and don't speak English, they're NEP, and they don't have the skills to, per se, learn to read in English at that point, but they do have the background to be able to learn to read in Spanish at that point. And are we doing that child a disservice if we're waiting for their English skills to develop enough to be able to read on level, whereas we could be teaching them to read on level as they come in as kindergartners? And so in the same way that you were saying about your second grade student that comes in and all those skills that transfer, they'll have built those skills.
I'm so sorry. I need to move us on because this has
Okay.
taken way more time than allotted. But should there be any more space for conversation or questions, please use the board tracker.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, the next business in order is a presentation from Brian Snow and Bridget Durkash from the District Accountability Committee.
So we didn't need to take action on any of those policies?
No.
Perfect.
Hello and good evening. My name is Brian Snow, and I am the current co-chair of the District Accountability Committee. And this is my colleague and fellow DAC member, Bridget Durkash. Thank you for having us this evening. We appreciate the opportunity to be here. Just as a quick reminder, the DAC is tasked with reviewing school performance, analyzing budgets, and providing input on educational priorities for the district. We're also the liaison between the school accountability committees and this board. One of the important roles of the DAC is to review and advise each school year this board on the UIP. So that's what we're here to do tonight. Real quick before we jump into that, just wanted to make a quick plug for the DAC. We are currently in the midst of a recruiting drive. We're actively looking for new folks to join our group. Recently, we've had some letters to the editor printed in some of the local newspapers. You might have seen that. Got some interest through that, which is great. We're also working to reach out directly to district teachers and staff over the next couple of weeks, because we need expertise from our staff and teachers. But if anyone in attendance at this meeting or watching on YouTube, or anybody on the board who knows of anybody who might be interested in joining the DAC, We have a very easy email. It's roaringfork dac@rfschools.com. I know it's also on district website. We have a page on there specific to the DAC. We would love to chat about what we do and how we can leverage, experience and expertise of our great community to join our group. So anyway, I'm going to turn it over to Bridget. She has only been on the deck for a couple of months, but has jumped in with both feet and has done an amazing job, and we're very lucky to have her. So I'm gonna pass it off.
Right. Right. Well, thank you for letting us present to you tonight. Our goal is to give you a little bit of background information, which you all probably already know, but just in case anyone is listening online, they are able to look at that. Review some of the high level components of the UIP that we're really addressing in our feedback, and then giving an overview of recommendations, talking about aligning strategies with the root causes that are already identified, and then finally some targeted recommendations to the board. So the school district, the unified improvement plans are important tools that help the school district hold accountability to their improvement. Our role in that is really creating a feedback loop. So there's continuous information and conversation about how we can improve, and just being able to see this from different points of view. Roaring Fork School District's Accountability Committee, the DAC, is required to advise its local school board concerning preparation of the annual submission of the UIP. And you all had this ready for us to look at in October, and we were supposed to provide feedback much sooner. And so we know that this is really delayed in that process, but that is something that we're doing now and hopeful for next year to do much earlier. So the high level components of the UIP are very small on this screen right here.
We have them in front of us also.
Really showing is student performance priorities, and then the next column over is the root causes, and then the final column is the major improvement strategies. And so what our recommendations are really looking at aligning the root causes and the major improvement strategies to provide feedback on how those could be more holistic and maybe more targeted in their alignment. So the overview that we have here is that the major improvement strategies identified root causes. Well, the current improvement strategies offer really valuable initiatives, and I want to talk a little bit about some of the work that has already been done that is really valuable and that we really see. We also see that there is a sort of misalignment, or perhaps a missing link in the identified root causes and the strategies that have been identified, particularly around attendance. And I'll jump back really quickly. This is, again, hard to see, but if we zoom into it, one of the student performance priorities is student attendance. And when we look at the root causes, we're seeing inconsistent feeling of sense of belonging across students, time it takes for lasting culture change. And then some of the identified major improvement strategies were around reinforcing attendance expectations. And so although that is an important component, it's missing some possible other steps that we would just like to see highlighted. And this is really interesting because the school district is doing a lot of this work already, which we'll talk about through the presentation, but being able to identify that in the UIP, I think would be helpful for our community to really see the steps that are being taken. Where right now, I don't know if the wider community is able to see that. So the other areas on this sort of overview that we wanted to talk about are really the importance of the partnerships with caregivers and families. We know that caregivers and families, especially in middle school and elementary school, are what is really influencing student attendance. And then as students get older into high school, it's really their own sense of belonging, their sense of agency in the school. And so wanting to really address that partnership with students and families at a young age to create a cultural shift around attendance as a priority. By fostering that strong collaboration with families, then we can really create more of a shared commitment that goes beyond reinforcing those expectations that we're seeing in the root causes. And then we want to see more of that actively addressing that student sense of belonging. We know that our educators have a really deep understanding of their community. They know the most effective ways to really reach out. We're already seeing that. Dr. Cole talked about the beginning of this. Steps that are being taken by schools, by the Family Resource Center, and having huge amounts of attendance in different events, such as the event that happened last night at Glenwood Springs Elementary School. And we want to just really see, are there ways that the district can support those initiatives? Are there ways that we can strengthen and sustain those efforts? And I do think that since COVID, there has been a push out of families, and we're now needing to do a little bit more active work to bring them back into our schools. So our recommendations are really around mental health and wellness, family engagement through the DAC and the SAC, student engagement through to create more of that agency and sense of belonging, and then supporting teacher and school initiatives to meet those goals. So in the gap that we saw was really around these three root causes that were addressed. Inconsistent feelings of sense of belonging, student cultural challenges, and lasting, oh, I forgot to change the slide, lasting cultural changes. And so these are the root causes that were highlighted in the UIP. So some strategies to address root causes. One of the big strategies that we talked about as the DAC is whole school wellness really improves attendance. And that starts with healthy teachers, fostering a positive learning environment. So for example, role modeling. Teachers who prioritize physical health and mental well-being set a positive example for students that promotes a culture of self-care and wellness. When teachers are healthy, both physically and mentally, there is a consistent presence. They're more likely to have fewer sick days, ensuring stability and continuity in the classroom. And then that consistency helps build trust and engagement, and can positively impact student attendance. They're also more likely to have more energy and be more engaged in the school, right? So teachers who are feeling physically and mentally well deliver really engaging lesson plans. We have amazing teachers in our valley, and we want to make sure that we can really keep them. But those lessons, that creativity that teachers are bringing, that's what motivates students to attend school regularly. But this is more than just addressing teachers, right? This is also addressing healthy students. We know that healthy students are more likely to be at school as well. So to reduce absenteeism, students with access to both physical health supports and mental health supports are less likely to miss school due to being sick or having different emotional challenges that would create barriers. There's increased learning outcomes as well. Healthy students focus better. They can actively participate in school. And that again reinforces the value of attendance and then sense of belonging as well. When teachers and staff create those supportive environments, students feel really valued and more likely to attend. And I do want to acknowledge that we see this in our district. Teachers are doing this. It's already happening. And how can we really, again, highlight that in our UIPs so that the larger community knows about it? There is a feedback loop in how does performance and mental and physical wellness, how are those related? And we really would love to see those highlighted. Overall, we just know that whole school wellness improves attendance, collaboration with wellness initiatives, programs that promote health for both teachers and students, such as mindfulness trainings, fitness challenges, access to counseling. Those all create a culture of wellness in the schools. And then also improved relationships. When teachers and students are both well, interactions are more positive. And we see that increasing a student's sense of belonging and their motivation to attend. So that is one of our sort of areas. Another area is building bridges, partners and caregivers and families to support attendance. And for us, we really see this as a step that we can support to take with the DAC. Oh, I didn't do it again. Sorry. Thanks. But we really want to see that growing parent engagement through the DAC and the SAC participation. It creates shared ownership and engagement. And when we have that vision of what we want to see for our schools, when we have more people engaged and involved, then we're more likely to have trust and strength, and we're more likely to see those positive school changes. So again, this is addressing those barriers through understanding those root causes and those tailored strategies. And then our next one and our last one on here is really cultivating connection. And this is strategies to enhance student sense of belonging. So what we talked about in this area is really visible leadership support and commitment, ensuring that district leadership is publicly prioritizing a sense of belonging and support staff initiatives in this area. Again, we're seeing these initiatives being taken at all of the schools. How can we really highlight that and use more positive reinforcement? Feedback mechanisms, regularly soliciting input from teachers and administration about what resources they need to enhance that sense of belonging. I think this is happening as well, but it's something that maybe the wider community doesn't know about. And then recognizing recognition and incentives is a big piece. So celebrating those efforts, rewarding teachers and administrators who are implementing innovative practice and supporting belonging. Thinking about Basalt High School, they gave a survey to all of their students and are really setting goals to challenge themselves. How can we make sure all of our 9th and 10th graders are feeling like they have coping skills, feeling like they can really get through more distress tolerance periods? And they set a goal to see if they could create change by the end of the semester. And so what are ways that we can really recognize those pieces? And then tools, this goes with data efforts too, but student surveys. If we know the students that aren't feeling like a sense of belonging, then we can have more targeted interventions, behavior attendance data, belonging frameworks, distributing evidence-based frameworks. Again, we already are doing that, but bringing more awareness to it. I know that last year there's new toolkits that were introduced into the district and parents have been really engaged, but we're seeing those efforts in schools like Carbondale Community School, at Glenwood Springs Elementary School, where they're bringing parents together for parent coffee chats or for discussions and input on struggles that they may be seeing as well. And then belonging frameworks. So, oh, sorry, I already talked about that. The last piece that I just wanted to say is for student sense of belonging, other ways to really engage students and to have that highlighted in the UIP. What are ways that they can be engaged in higher levels in their school, that they can be student ambassadors, peer mentors, student advisory committees? What are ways that we can really pull on that student leadership to enhance their sense of belonging in their school and get them to help students as well? Is there anything with that? Okay, that's all I have.
Thank you so much. Each board member will now have 2 minutes to share comments or questions. We'll begin with Director DeFreitas.
Hi, thank you. I'm trying to get some video working, but we'll see how that goes. Okay, thank you for being here tonight and for all of the work that you do on the District Accountability Committee. It's so important to have you all engaging and being this liaison between the board and the school and the community. I just really appreciate your work, and I know that it is a commitment to show up for these conversations again and again. I was interested in your strategies specifically around whole school wellness. Two things, and I don't know if maybe, you all have obviously thought about all of these things so much, but with healthy teachers and then healthy students in the district, obviously we struggle with providing compensation that balances cost of living for teachers and housing issues. And then around students, mental health accessibility is becoming harder to bridge funding gaps between. I don't mean to put you on the spot, but those two things kind of stuck out. And I would just love if you have other thoughts of things that the district hasn't said or done, or those conversations that you're like, man, I wish someone would just hear me if I said this. Are there specifics around those that you wanted to offer more perspective on?
Yeah, it is a challenge, right, for funding initiatives around those pieces. And I think what the goal of all of this is to create a culture of wellness in the school. And so what that means is that these do not have to be these major initiatives. They could be small pieces, creating more active activity within the schools. Most of my information and knowledge is coming from Glenwood Springs Elementary School, but they do a lot of teacher wellness activities. They have different prizes that they're giving. They have different challenges that they're doing to sort of create wellness within their school culture. And I'm wondering, what are ways that the district could support that? Are there mini grants that could be offered that are small, but that could support those efforts that could really offset? I do think removing barriers to mental health is a huge piece. And it's something that I could talk at length about because I do work with the Aspen Hope Center. I'm the director of the school-based mental health program. And so I do think that is a huge priority, but I also think that being able to lean into our family resource centers to be able to connect to community-based services, looking at organizations like Pathfinders for Grief and Loss. We have a Mind Springs, Mountain Family. There's a lot of organizations that are offering these services, but what are ways that we can remove those barriers and keep that as a priority for the school district? I think that's important, but I do think there are some small steps that can be taken within the school level initiatives that staff and administration can take on to increase the idea of wellness, and then also leaning into our crews that we have to start the day. I know that is something that's really strong specifically in the elementary school, but how do we continue crew as we get into middle school and high school? My kids are young, so this could already be happening and I'm just not as aware.
Yeah. Thank you. And then one question, if I'm a new parent or community member interested in participating in the DAC, could you maybe just describe or paint a quick picture so that I will know personally when I pitch it to people to join? What would they experience walking in the first time?
Yeah, sure. So the DAC is unique in that, I think a lot of folks, when they hear about how to participate in the community and the school, they obviously know what the school board does, and they have a personal connection to their schools, right? So the SAC is where they go to help either raise money or work on programming or whatever their focus is at the school level. The DAC is kind of a unique kind of in-between space, right? And we've struggled to find, and I think, a good way to explain what our role is. And I think that has led to right now a lack of folks. Luckily, we've sort of grown and we've increased our membership, but we're looking for more people who are wanting to think about it at a larger level. the district level, whether that's from a budget standpoint, if that's your focus, if that's or mental health focus or whatever it may be, it's more of a, strategic level, higher level. But also the connection between the schools, the individual SACs and the district. So it's a kind of a unique place that I think the one thing that we have talked a little bit about as a group is how to market ourselves a little bit better. And it's still something we're working on, if that makes sense. I think from a individual person's perspective, we ask that, you at least serve 2 years. We have meetings. We used to do meetings every month, but now we're more on every other month cadence throughout the school year. And it's kind of a unique thing in that there are some statutory requirements in terms of membership. So we have parents, we also have teachers and administrators, and then a community member. So we kind of mix folks across the spectrum, but we're always really looking for teachers and administrators, folks that have educational backgrounds. Hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you. It did.
Director After.
Great. Thanks for being here tonight and for presenting. We appreciate it, and for your participation on the DAC and your leadership. Can you talk a little bit about how the school accountability committees are going? Are you all involved in those at all? I think you're okay. Good. So you're nodding. So I'd be curious your perception of how it's going in general for the school accountability committees these days.
It's a great question. So that is one of the things that I think that we need to do a better job of is to reinforce the connection between the DAC and the SAC and the board, that kind of through line there. The DAC historically has sort of dropped the ball when it comes to making that connection. We've talked about getting back to that with honestly only 3 of us. It's a little challenging to manage all of that we're doing. That being said, the number of schools that have an established SAC with again, the statutory requirement of the head of the SAC and actually meeting and not meeting all the requirements has grown. The last time I looked, it was around 50%. Dr. Cole might know better than I. We'd love to get that up to 100% because that's what's required. But similar to the DAC, where this has taken some time to kind of get moving, that's more of a 2025 or 26 goal for the DAC. We'd love to get that to 100%. If we can get it over 3/4, I think we're doing pretty well.
Great. Thanks.
I think that's a big piece too in the recommendations, that parent engagement overall seems to be down on just as like a newcomer coming into this, sort of having this expectation of, like everyone's involved, we're doing all these different pieces, but really having the realization that across the district of like 50%, it seems really low, and the DAC has really low engagement. And so that's one of the areas that we really want to see as a priority is how do we re-engage families? How do we bring families back into the school community? And I think both with COVID, where people were really pushed out for good reasons to keep us healthy, but also with school safety, it's really hard as a parent to feel that sense of connection. We're able to text and email, but having more ownership in it with the school, my perspective is that is down. And it's something that I'd love to see more involvement with. And like Brian said, that's one of our goals, is to increase participation in the DAC, but also in the SACs.
Thanks for being here. Director Tyler.
Bridget and Brian, thank you for being here. First of all, I heard you say with the 3 of us, have basically your meetings been 3 people?
Well, I should say we are now up to 4 with Bridget. But yes, it has been a struggle the last probably year. And some of that is term limits, folks that are rolling off because they've put their time in. And it's also, I think, a struggle with, again, explaining what we do and marketing ourselves. That's something that we've worked on quite a bit. This is the whole push that we've made this month and moving into next month to get ourselves out there.
Great.
So,
Well, thank you for your time and your volunteerism, first of all. I did see your letter to the editor, so that's great. I'm glad you did that. Did you also send a letter out in Spanish to the Spanish speaking newspapers?
I don't think that we did, and that is a great idea. I will make it.
Okay. And do you know Katia Gonzalez, who is sitting behind you in the white sweater?
I do not.
Maybe maybe y'all should like touch base at the end of this meeting and see if she can help you find some representation too.
Fantastic.
You don't have to stay till the very end if you don't want.
And then when you have your meetings, if somebody were to come who was Spanish speaking, is there any kind of translation that's available at your meetings?
Historically, we have done that, and that was one of the big pushes when we had a larger membership was to diversify from a location geography standpoint. We're very basalt heavy, unfortunately, right now. So we've been trying to get folks from, luckily, somebody from our Glenwood representation, but not only geography, but different languages as well. So Spanish speaking also struggle right now. It's at this point we are looking for bodies. And once we have gotten a good group to attend meetings and to continue to push forward, we would like to expand the net as much as possible. Right now, it's, if you're interested, come on down. So it's a longer term process than I think that the folks that joined recently anticipated. But I think that's true of lots of other organizations in the Valley. It's going to be a little bit of a longer term project than we had hoped. So.
And lastly, I would like to say I appreciate your strategies to address root causes. They sound like great ideas. I think they're very big picture, and it's maybe hard for the input that you've given for the district maybe to take that and say, how can it be handled by the district? And maybe if it's possible, like to get like specifics, could the district do this? And like maybe have like break it into some kind of like actionable parts might be helpful.
We could definitely do that. I think we have some specific strategies, but then we're like,
I don't
is that a place to give really specific ones? And I don't know if I can jump in.
Appreciate it. And Bridget, your lens on the knowing our schools so well and your connection to what's happening, especially around social emotional well-being. And I really appreciated the push around, hey, a lot of these things are happening, and either stamp that there's some alignment with the UIP and that this is actually a deliberate initiative to build that intentionality and awareness. I just really appreciated that push and your depth of understanding of what's happening, because I think that those are good, like, I think that, you know, your language around bridging and making those connections of like either lift up what's working because it is happening in a lot of pockets and then make that broader, or just draw that deeper connection. So I just really appreciated that. I think, you know, and it was a good push of like, oh yeah, no, that you're right. A lot of these things are happening. A lot of them are because of initiatives, and we didn't dial them all in the UIP. Yeah.
And I do really think that feedback loop to the wider community, people will say, oh, that's why we're doing that. That's why the district is doing these things, because it does have a bigger impact. And I think that's a piece that's missing.
Thank you.
So thanks. I'll just echo the thanks from the board for being volunteers, for your participation. I think you guys know, at least Brian has been there, you know, this board has cared very deeply to have not only a DAC that exists and is separate, autonomous from our executive team and from the district in itself, but also that we've tried, at least in spirit, to try to get our SACs going. I guess in this moment, I would just like to offer the recommendation to you guys and to the team. I know that historically we've tried to get information out on when SACs are meeting and have tried to gather the information from staff. I know that not too long ago, there was a board tracker request with that information. Has that been shared with the DAC? Those dates for the upcoming SAC meetings with the schools?
I think we did this.
Okay. Do you, Brian, know what SAC? What am I
I
talking
know Sarah, the other co-chair, she's kind of the SAC expert. She unfortunately couldn't join us tonight. I'll make note of that to see if we had that and it's been updated.
Yeah.
I know we've used it in the past. I'm not sure where it's at now, but.
Yeah, I think it would be good for our teams to get in communication on if we could send that out to the community. Like, if your kiddo goes to Glenwood Springs High School, you should know when that SAC is. And if you have multiple kids in the school district, then these are the dates where you can go to the SAC. This is the date for the DAC meeting. Like, I do think historically we've tried to get people to attend. We've tried to figure out how we could promote. It's been a learning curve, I think, for everybody. It's definitely it has felt uphill. And I think to Director Tytler's point, we did have a conversation when Chris Becker was still here with us regarding interpretation services, and there was a conversation that we didn't have a budget allocated for that. And so I think moving forward, just when we think for us as a board, when we're thinking of budgeting for 25-26 and the goals that we might have for the DAC, I think we need to have that top of mind as well, that, we currently the DAC does not have a budget set allocated for it. So I just wanted to, again, reiterate the thanks for your time, for being volunteers for the Roaring Fork School District and for all the work that you guys have done. And we appreciate your recommendations. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thanks. The next business in order is a CFO update, including response to audit board letter recommendations from Chief Chacoin.
Thank you, Director Ramirez. We're just going to go ahead and defer to the board for any questions that you may have on this item. I'm sure you guys have reviewed it, and we're here to answer your questions, both me and Catherine together shortly.
Okay, thank you so much. Director DeFreitas.
Thank you. Sorry to just be a disembodied voice this evening. Christy, thank you so much for putting in so much work, and I just want to appreciate that. And I know that you're doing everything you can to work on building additional capacity and bringing a lot of these accountability measures that we're putting in place online as you can going forward. And I really appreciate that. And we understand that the timeline you're working with is reflective of what staff is really capable of doing it. And that's something that's really important to us. We value you all here, and we want to make sure that you can stay for the long haul. So thanks. I had a couple of questions. We've gotten a few of the quarterly financial statements already, and I'm just wondering if you could speak to whether you feel like the team currently has this, maybe is more of a Catherine question. If they have the capacity to deliver those quarterly financial statements, just like you've been doing. How are we feeling there?
Thank you. I'm going to just go ahead and defer to Catherine, and then we'll just kind of just bounce back and forth on answering that one.
Yes, I feel like, thanks for the question. And yes, I do feel like we're going to be able to get all of the quarterlies in a timely manner. And we've really shored up our accounting procedures and systems with Christy here. And we've set some very strict deadlines for ourselves. We're going to have the second quarter by next week. And every quarter, we're going to have them to you. But say, yes, we are working hard on, we've had a lot of staff turnover, as you know, and so we're working really hard to fix some of the holes. And having another a budget analyst added to our team is going to really help with some of the holes in our system being a little understaffed and turnover. So thanks.
Yeah, it's a huge priority of the board to start having those regular quarterly financial reporting available to us, especially with reconciliation of expenses. I'm wondering, how would you describe, I don't know, urgency perhaps, or severity of those issues to you right now?
Severity of which issues? Sorry.
Of making sure that the financial statements and that the board, I mean, I just want to make sure, I think it's the board's, responsibility to make it very clear. We've had misalignment in the past on these. And as a new board member, I take full responsibility for that, not knowing what I don't know. But just, I'm wondering, how does your team feel about where this new reporting or more consistent reporting falls, I guess, on a priority level for you?
I think it's our highest priority right now. We're really pushing to get everything reconciled through December 31st. And we've been working on that above all else besides getting people paid. But, it's been our highest priority besides anything else that accidentally gets in the way. So.
Thanks. Those are my questions.
Director After?
Great, thanks. Thanks for being here, Catherine. And Christy, we've seen you for several hours already, so. So I read through this several times. Thanks for the thoroughness of the responses. I really appreciate it. It's a nice improvement for me to read over the last one I saw in my first year on the board. So I really do appreciate the responses. Is there I don't have any questions about the specifics. I just wondered if you wanted to lift anything up from this for the public that might be listening, or to share any parts of this that you are proud or excited about, or anything you think it's important for the public to know. But I don't have any specific questions.
I think the one, I'm a true financial analyst geek. And so I think the one that I'm the most excited about are the quarterly financial statements. I think that that's going to provide the board the most information, and myself in looking at the financials and making sure that we're tracking on budget, and that we can track and make sure that we find any situations or issues earlier in that process, and the reconciliation processes, and shoring those up to those timelines. I think those are the big ones that I'm excited about, especially, in managing the budget as well. That would be the one I would be lifting up the most. The other ones are a lot of process issues that we're just going to have to get deep in, making sure on segregation of duties and things like that. And that's just really trying to head off anything that could be a material misstatement in the future. And so that's very important for us to just look at, and just like Catherine had just stated, with that additional budget analyst position on the staff, then we're going to be able to just kind of shore those duties up and make sure that we have a proper segregation on a lot of those. Some are going to take more time than others, but we're going to continue to work on those in the timelines allotted in the response. So.
Great. Thank you. Dr. Tyler.
Thank you both for being here. I would just like to echo that I appreciate how your responses to the auditor's letter, the thoroughness of your responses, and it's nice to have those known that they're all being addressed. So my really only questions I have, and it sort of maybe is the same question I had last time that I thought maybe we were going to be able to get a response to, and if not, maybe I can write it in a board tracker or something. But in looking at the last quarterly financial, I had asked about the increases in purchase services for instruction and also for salaries for instructional support, and why those like the instructional support salaries had doubled this year, and why the purchase services for instruction had gone up so much. Do you know the reasons behind those?
Thank you for that question and for the reminder on that. I think just given the timelines and everything, my apologies for not getting back to you on that. Our response is, I'm going to try to include that response in our next quarter. Since we're so close to that, we're one board meeting away. If that's okay, we can watch that and then just have a response ready for that next board meeting.
Perfect. Do you want me to write you to remind you of what those areas are?
If you wouldn't mind, that would be
You got
super
it.
helpful.
Okay.
Do you, okay, Anna's got it. Okay, super. I appreciate it. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
So thank you, team, for being here and for also your time on this response. As Director After mentioned, the thoroughness is appreciated. Thank you for taking the time. I think that this is a good cadence for us to get into in not only having a response letter, but I appreciate your appreciate the professionalism in this letter, because I think this is like a place where we can move off of, like moving forward. This is the expectation, and I appreciate that this is a very like good quality document. I did notice that there were a couple of different items that you guys put a date for June 30th. So is the expectation that you guys will be presenting to the board as a follow-up on these items?
Yes, we're gonna, and the challenge is like making sure we're continuing to move forward on the budget, and then we need to, getting a new position, for the budget analyst position, and then shoring up between all of the, the staff and having some conversation around how that's all gonna ferret out. Will probably take through the rest of this fiscal year, but, we will make sure to have a response with the board and just update you on our progress.
And when you say update us on the progress, are you saying like at one meeting, you're gonna go through all these June 30 timelines, or you're gonna update us as you guys complete them?
I think it would make more sense for us to do this after the budget in one spot. So that it's not like, oh yeah, which one did we still need to do, right? I mean, we'll make sure to get that on the calendar for June. How does that sound?
So that was one of the reasons why I was flagged, because we typically try not to meet as a board, and which is historically why we got into this late budgeting season. And so I just wanted to flag that, because I understand you guys setting a deadline because you guys are working.
Yeah,
which is expected. But the board in itself tends to have the last of our meetings at towards the end of May.
It's June 11th, I think.
Yeah, and I think we have one meeting in June.
Right, one meeting, yeah.
We, Christy and I have been working to try to build out do some backwards planning from the final budget adoption. And we'll try to have an update for the board as soon as possible on that. Given some of the challenges that we are feeling in terms of capacity right now, we may need to come to you with knowing now that those extra 2 weeks might make a big difference. So let's kind of keep that TBD, but we might need that time. In our initial kind of rough cut of how are the next few weeks and months going to go, it looked pretty aggressive for us to try to get that done by that June 11th, but let's circle back on that.
We're going to do everything we can to try to do that too. We also realize and recognize that we don't want to rush budget process either. So that's the challenge, is to meet both of those and still have that early June. We just want to make sure when we're talking to the board that is that we can meet that. So that's our challenge right now, and just like scurrying and digging a tunnel.
Yeah.
So.
And I do think if the update needs to be pushed to the board retreat, that's fine. But I do think, and I'm glad I brought it up, because for us as a board, that was huge part of our conversation last year, of the fact that for 2 years now, we have extended ourselves past the time that we as a board had typically been meeting. I did also just have a question. So I am assuming that the response regarding HR will be brought to the board at the next board meeting. Okay. And in regards to our accounts, so one, also thank you for just the commitment for quarterly financials. As my colleagues have shared, there for us as a board, it's obviously very important that moving forward, that also becomes part of practice and process, that we're able to receive those. And I think the board is committed to putting that into policy as well. Just so that way there is an understanding that that is the expectation moving forward. There was a response from the finance team about the 3 to 5 years for implementation for the segregation of duties. And so I just wanted to have you guys maybe share a little bit more of that. I feel like that's a huge lift.
Yeah. Would you like to? Okay, we'll tag team that one. So this has been on the board letter, audit letter for quite some time for the school district. We recognize the importance of segregation of duties. And we also understand that all the activity accounts are like there's all these separate bank statements, and then there's actually for the actual numbers that are put in the system, it's in a separate company, if you will, within IV, that then has to be imported into our database for our other IV for our audit. And so there's just a lot of process around that, and that people are really used to that process too. So that would require a complete overhaul to really get to piece that out, which really would be a longer term solution. But I'm really appreciative of Catherine and Crystal, our accounts payable manager, because they have come up with some interim solutions that will help to mitigate those segregation of duty issues. And one of them is that Crystal has agreed to look at the reports monthly to make sure that there aren't any red flags, if you will, for those particular accounts, and just make sure that if there are, that there's follow up on that. And so that's a really good, like, I guess, there's an auditing term I'm looking for that helps to shore up the segregation of duties issue. And then the other thing is that I'm grateful for Catherine and Crystal, who are already starting to work on a document of the do's and don'ts, and starting to work with the financial specialists about what they should be paying through their activity funds and things like that, and what they shouldn't be. And so as we get more training, and then we watch and monitor those accounts closer through Crystal's review monthly, that's going to help with that process in the interim until we can get to a longer term solution. Did you have anything else to add?
I'll just say that, yes, just like Christy said, that comment has been on our board letter since the beginning of time, because every school has had their own checking account, and every school manages their own finances, which are their activity funds, which come from student fees and other collections of receipts that they get at the schools. And so each school manages their own, and those are their activity funds. And so and it's just been kind of ignored or pushed down the road. So the reason we're saying 3 to 5 years is because it would require a massive overhaul of our systems. But we are working in the meantime. Crystal and I are going to be working, like, just really trying better with these ideas of like, how can we oversee these? It's hard because it's decentralized. And so how can we have better oversight? And so that's where we came up with the idea of just having a monthly review of each school's checking accounts and reviewing those with the finance specialists at each location. And so until we can check, like really tackle that big overhaul of figuring out how to redo every school's financial system, we're coming up with some good shoring up efforts.
Thank you. I wanted to move us into 5 minutes of discussion, and then I also just had a follow-up. I'm not sure if the question Director Tyler asked earlier was in regards to the budget on the memo, but I kind of also remembered right now that there was a ask regarding, okay, so yeah, okay. I just wanted to make sure, because I think I had also followed up to say I wanted to know the general and grant fund. And I don't believe those are on the supplemental budget, so.
I thought I answered that one. Let's look on the board tracker. I thought I answered that one, so let's just check that one later.
Okay. Any other board members have any more questions?
Nope.
Nope.
No, thank you.
Thank you for the late night, Catherine.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night.
The next business in order is action on the 24-25 supplemental budget. Do I have a motion to approve the 24-25 supplemental budget?
I make a motion that the board approve the 24-25 supplemental budget as presented.
Do I have a second?
No second.
Each board member will have 2 minutes to share comments or ask questions. We will begin with Director DeFreitas.
Thank you. I feel pretty confident in the briefing I've gotten about this information, as well as the thoroughness and clarity of the staff memo. I know that it was covered in a work session previously, and I just really appreciate the time and effort that it has taken to approach this supplemental budget with clarity of purpose and compassion, if those are strange things to put next to each other, but with the idea always being minimal impacts on students and families and schools. And so I just don't have questions. Thank you.
Director After.
Great, thanks. For anyone listening, just FYI, we had a 2-hour work session on this and dug into essentially every line item that you can see in the Easter egg colored document that's in the agenda. So thanks for your time, Christy, earlier, and Dr. Cole for going through that with us in such detail. I did just want to see do you want to say a couple things for the public about what this is and why we're doing it? I think it's maybe germane for folks to know this is a budget supplement for 24-25. Ideally, we approve this by the end of this month, and then we can kind of hopefully move on to be talking about 25-26 in short order. But do you want to say anything?
Yeah, thanks, Director After, for that. I think, well, the thing that I would say, there's a couple of significant points in regards to the supplemental budget. This is our second supplemental budget for this year, and both of those are working to shore up our 24-25 budget and finances to assure that we're not going to spend below our minimum fund balance, and to make sure that it's a reasonable plan moving forward, so that we've found some budget omissions and how we're resolving for those. And we believe this supplemental budget does that. We can't confirm that that's going to be everything we're going to find. We still have to go through the 25-26 process for the budgeting process, which is going to be great, because then we'll be able to really look through every single little thing. But for now, this is really our best view after reviewing the finances for a couple of months to shore up our finances, and also moving forward to make sure that we have a better process for the board to understand finances in the middle of the year year, and look at quarterly financials and really get deep on about budget questions and information in the middle of the year, in the future as well. So I think that it really checks all the boxes with where we want to move going forward also.
Great. Thank you. I don't have anything else.
Director Tyler?
I would just like to echo Director After about how we went through this budget line by line. And in doing so, we found out where the holes were in how the budget was originally done and what was either an omission, an error, or an overage, and broke it down in those three categories. And then also broke it down by whether the amount was a recurring amount or not. And that was very helpful for understanding and giving a better idea of where there was oversight and where we had holes to fill. And so I appreciate the diligence in which you have looked at our 24-25 budget and the assurance that you think, at least up until this point, that you have found pretty much everything that's there. So just thank you for your work with that.
Okay, thank you.
I'll echo the thanks of gratitude for my colleagues, and then I'll just also mention thanks to our facilities team and Chief Ben Bonfock for their work, for that team's work in helping us with this. I think that obviously this board has been very intentional in these last couple of months to dig deep with you at the helm on the budget and to ask questions and to try to understand as much as possible our finances. And we've appreciated, one, your willingness to answer questions, to share information with us, to make it as readable as possible for us, like in layman's terms, and also just to make it accessible for us, because I do think that this has been a huge pivot from our norm. I have appreciated hearing the team echo our sentiment that we don't want to rush the budget this year, that we want to be very intentional to ask questions, to have time with it, to be able to digest really what is happening. And, I'll echo this as much as possible, but, even us being able to have a finance committee has really helped in having some of these initial discussions and asking some of these questions. And so just thank you to you and the team, the entire finance team, for your guys's work on finding all of the spaces and the gaps and also the omissions and the errors, because it does mean a lot to us that we're thorough and that we're really intentional in having a good budget and being very clear with that. So thank you guys for your work, for all of the teams that participated, and for everyone who was able to find some money somewhere for this budget. Okay. We already have a first and second, right? Yep. And there's no vote on this? On the supplemental budget? Oh, does anybody need extra time for discussion? Sure.
I just want to name, and we're moving deliberately and thoughtfully, and things sometimes often also happen quickly. And, we just a few moments ago kind of closed the door on the 23-24 audit from the finance perspective. We're still going to hear from HR, but we literally 4 minutes ago wrapped the 23-24 audit, hearing from Chief Chacoin and Catherine Proctor, all the action steps, all the accountability measures that we're going to take to address that. We are now, I think this is a big deal. This is the plan that's going to resolve the challenges that we've uncovered in the 24-25 fiscal year. So this is the resolution. And so I just want to name that what we're solving here for is a number of issues, right? Some caused by our own kind of derail into self-insurance that costs more than we expected. Some of this is due to enrollment being down and us overestimating the number of kids we were going to have. A lot of this has to do with our 24-25 budget being rushed and having kind of incorrect assessments on our mill levy revenue. There were errors and omissions in that budget. And this supplemental is really our effort at this moment mid-year to just fix it and resolve it. And I'm so grateful, as you mentioned, Director Ramirez, of all the department heads that really worked hard to resolve this. I mean, we heard from the board and the finance committee and our staff as we headed into this, that the most important priorities were minimizing impacts to students. And so before we were going to come to the community with really hard decisions for this year that might impact kids, we wanted to make sure we did everything possible. We're not going to have to come to the community with really tough choices on this year. Next year, we're still working on. But that's a huge testament to the collaboration of our teams. I think there's a lot in terms of the department heads who've been creative and resilient and collaborative in solutions. A lot has to do with the board's conservative approach to budgeting Meadowood, right? There were a lot of savings in that, in the collaboration with contractors and all of the professionalism around Meadowood that resulted in contingency savings that are really helping us right now. We talked a lot about fund balance tonight, but man, if we were at minimum right now, we would have no ability to utilize the reserves to help us get out of this. And so, and then there were available contingency and real savings and expenditure reductions that Chief Chicoine helped us find. And so this is exciting. It's hard. There's a lot of hard work ahead. We're ready to move on into getting our heads into 25, 26, but all fall we've been saying we have to solve for 23, 24. And once we get that, we're going to wrap our heads around 24, 25. And then we're going to start talking about 25, 26. That's where we're at. And it's a testament to Chief Chicoine's leadership, her tenacity, her persistence to help us move along in this direction and find these resolutions. So I'm really proud of the budget that is before you today and all the learning that so many of us have had through this process. So just a little bit to add.
And I guess I would just like to add, this being a supplemental budget, it's not like supplementing things that we wanted to add to the budget. It's supplementing things that we're missing from the budget. And so things that we are already doing that we have to pay for because we're already doing them. We're not supplementing by saying, oh, let's add these new things. And so I just want to make that clear that supplemental means things that were omitted, errors, overages, not new things.
You could call for a vote.
After
Aye.
Director DeFreitas,
Aye.
Director Ramirez,
Aye.
Director Tyler. Aye.
The next business in order is action on the 23-24 assurances for financial accreditation. Do I have a motion to approve the 23-24 assurances for financial accreditation?
I move that the board approve the 2023-24 assurances for financial accreditation as presented.
Do I have a second?
I second.
Each board member will now have 2 minutes to share comments or ask questions. We'll begin with Director DeFreitas.
I don't have any questions about this item. Thank you.
Director After?
I don't have any questions or comments.
Director Tytler?
I also am good from the memo and the paperwork. It seems like these are logistical steps that we need to go through.
I did have just a question. At the end, we put a section that we're requesting that each internal charter school complete these forms and send them. Is there a timeline that you guys are asking the charter schools to turn those into you by?
I received them. So I think we're all set. I need to get this to the state by right. So both of those areas. I think it's part of our charter condition, just didn't realize they needed to do that. So I just had a reminder of that.
Great. It's good to. Okay. Anybody else need time for discussion?
Nope.
No. Please call for a vote.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you were going to add something. Chief
Nope.
Landon, no?
Nope.
Okay, sorry.
Okay, the vote, Director After.
Aye.
Director DeFreitas,
Aye.
Director Ramirez,
Aye,
Director Titler. Aye.
thank you. The next business in order is future agenda topics, board tracker request. We don't. Do we have any board tracker request items? Jonathan just left, so. Okay. So the next business in order is board updates and appreciations. We will begin with Director DeFreitas.
Thank you all and appreciate the late night. So I will keep this as short as I can. I'm gonna do a simple appreciation for all the classroom teachers who take time to give me updates on my specific children with their mind apps. I know that's not easy. I'm thinking especially of the middle school teachers at Glenwood Springs Middle School because they all have upwards of 80 kids to see every day in sixth grade. And so the fact that they'll reach out to me and share concerns and celebrations about my child is very meaningful and very helpful to feel connected. So I appreciate that a lot. Updates, I have been on the Colorado Association of School Boards resolutions committee looking at legislation in the state and budget conversations in Colorado, and I'm definitely learning a lot, drinking from the fire hose at the moment. So more to come on that going forward. And I just want to name that the last few days have been a challenge for a lot of people in our country with conflicting and chaotic messaging around where and how they can feel safe and secure. And I just want to reiterate that Roaring Fork Schools has policies in place and educational outreach in place and support systems in place to welcome and protect all of our students, regardless of who they are or where they came from or what level they're learning or what language they speak, and that is not something that is going to change. And I want to also appreciate administrative staff for communicating clearly about safety protocols with our staff in schools to make sure that students can just feel safe, because if you don't feel safe, you can't learn, and our business is and always will be learning and success for those students. So thanks.
Director After.
Yeah, not much to add to that, but thank you, Dr. Cole, for spending a little extra time on the finances with the board this week. That was appreciated. And thanks to the many hundreds of community members who filled out the superintendent evaluation survey. That is also very appreciated. Quick reminder to my board colleagues to fill out the superintendent evaluation and send back to me to compile by Friday morning, please. And thanks again to our finance team for all the extra long hours and extra diligence on the financial situation. That's it.
Director Titler.
Echoing Director After, I would like to say a special thanks to Chief Chacoin and her team, and especially I know you, Chief Chacoin, has spent hours beyond what a normal person works or could consider working in these last months, and just want to recognize and thank you for all those hours. And I think that same goes for you, Dr. Cole. I know your hours have been super long and burning the midnight candle or whatever that is, but thank you for the extra time and keeping a positive attitude and a good face about yourselves in all the work that you're doing. So thank you for that. As far as my updates on my committees, tomorrow morning I'm going down to work going down to BOCES for interviews for the executive director, and we'll be involved with that all day for hopefully hiring a new executive director for BOCES. On the housing front, we had a housing committee meeting yesterday. At that meeting, we talked about recalibration of rent and how it is in the policy for the housing committee to do that on an every year basis, but that has not been done for many years. So we are going to be looking at recalibrating rents for incomes that are currently happening and make sure that is done every couple years. And then there's ongoing discussion about rent tables and how those rent tables should look and what those earnings should be based on. And so that will be for future discussion. And then last week met with IBB, and want to thank everybody who took time out of their days to make subplans to come and participate and be part of that group. And then also for that group who is committed to meeting every Thursday until the benefits can be figured out and come to an agreement on how that works. And that kicks off on January the 30th, this Thursday, with a budget summit.
Thank you. I will just share an appreciation for our team regarding the CMC Automotive Technology Center grand opening. It was really great to see a lot of our staff there who had a hand in making that project come to fruition. And so I appreciate the hard work and also just the ability for our team to give up the space. I really look forward to the success of that program. On Tuesday, there was a IBB Leaders Insurance Committee conversation that I got to sit in for Director Kuhlenberg. And I think we're on schedule for that follow-up recommendation coming to the board by the end of February. And then, like Director Taylor mentioned, we have the IBB Budget Summit tomorrow, starting at 4:30 to 6:20. And I have a URA meeting in Glenwood, which no idea how it happened, but so I look forward to that conversation because we have not been able to participate very much in those, and it is a mandatory meeting, or not mandatory, it's a, what is the word? We're happy that we're included, I guess. And then I just wanted to add that I will be heading over to NSBA advocacy this weekend, which I'm just looking at my calendar. But I look forward to those conversations that will be taking place. I was very excited when Matt Cook, or the person at CASB, mentioned that we were going to be meeting with our CD3 person, which has never happened in the history of us being there. So I look forward to bringing back some information on that conversation for our next board meeting. Okay, if there is no further business and there's no objection, the meeting will be adjourned. That is 9:15 p.m.